"Don't open the door, teach her how to save water." My daughter-in-law spat those cruel words as she turned the lock, trapping me in the bathroom for 2 days, in the very house I had bought with my own sweat and blood. Outside, my son calmly turned on the TV, leaned back in his chair, and laughed, as if his mother's humiliation were nothing more than cheap entertainment. I shivered inside a damp towel, no food, no chair, just the cold tile floor and the steady drip of water. While I curled up in the dark, they ate dinner and laughed together, unaware that in that exact moment I had made a decision. I would take everything back, and that would be the last peaceful dinner they'd ever have in this house. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I'm Lila Whitmore, 71 years old, living in Virginia. I once thought old age would bring me peace, mornings making coffee in my own kitchen, listening to sparrows outside the window, and sometimes visiting church on Sundays. But peace only comes when you stop placing your trust in the wrong people. I never imagined I'd be locked in a bathroom by my own daughter-in-law like a criminal. I never imagined my only son, the child I held through freezing nights, whose forehead I kissed every time he had a fever, could sit there, casually turn up the TV, hear the click of a lock, and laugh. A small laugh, buried under TV commercials, that still stabs my heart every time I remember it. That bathroom was small, cold, and damp. I had only a towel around me, my hair still dripping. The chill from the tile seeped into my back and legs, making my knees ache. I leaned against the wall, staring at the dim light leaking under the door. No chair, no food, just the steady drip of the faucet and the clink of silverware outside the everyday rhythm of people who had forgotten their humanity. I didn't cry. I've cried plenty in my life when my husband died, when I lost my job, when I sold our old car to pay my son's hospital bill. But this time I stayed quiet. I knew tears don't wake anyone up. They only make you weaker. I rested my head against the wall and closed my eyes, letting memories pour in. Over 40 years ago, my husband Edward and I worked ourselves to the bone to buy this house. A small place in the suburbs of Richmond, 2 bedrooms, an apple tree in the backyard, and a white fence Edward painted himself. When he died of heart disease, I swore I'd keep this house at any cost, because it was the last piece of us left. I never imagined it would become my prison. I remember the day Cole brought Alyssa over. She was young, pretty, and smart, the kind of woman any man would want beside him. I was happy my son had found someone good. I welcomed her with an apple pie Edward used to love, and Alyssa beamed and hugged me. I didn't know then it would be the last time she was sincere. In the first months after they married, they lived with me because they couldn't afford a place yet. I didn't mind. I said, "This house is yours. Think of it as a start." I didn't mention the deed was still in my name, not from suspicion, but because I didn't think I needed to guard myself from family. I was the mother, and that was my son. Looking back now, that thinking was both naive and foolish. Things changed gradually. At first, Alyssa made small comments. "Mom, you leave the lights on too much," or "This dish smells too strong." I nodded, smiled, and figured she liked things tidy. But then her words got sharper. "She still thinks this is her house." I heard it as I passed the kitchen. Cole stayed silent. He neither defended his mother nor pushed back on his wife, just silence. And silence can be crueler than words. I lived in the same house but felt more and more like an uninvited guest. I tried to keep the peace, cooking and doing laundry for myself, avoiding their dinner hour. When they went to work, I weeded the backyard and trimmed the roses. Once, I repainted the fence Edward left behind. Cole stepped out, looked at me and said coldly, "Mom, you're too loud. I'm trying to rest." I turned back, smiled softly, and apologized. But something cracked inside me. That night I couldn't sleep. I looked around my small room, the wedding photo of me and Edward, the wooden box with the house papers, an old safe, only I knew the combination to. I brushed my hand over the deed and thought, I'm still the owner of this house. Then I gave a bitter little smile. Owner? An owner who has to whisper in the dark just to remember she still has any rights? 2 days later, everything blew up over a hot shower. I'd been fixing the fence all afternoon. It was cold. The air smelled of damp earth and rotting leaves. When I finished, my back ached and my hands trembled. I went to shower just to let warm water soothe my old shoulders. 10 minutes, only 10 minutes. The first pounding on the door startled me. "How long are you going to be?" Alyssa's voice snapped, sharp and hard. I answered, "Just a moment, I'm almost done." Silence. A few seconds later, the lock clicked. I spun around, grabbed the handle, and pulled. It didn't budge. I pounded on the door and called Cole's name. No answer. The TV got louder. I heard silverware clinking. Laughter. I stood still. My heart raced, but my mind suddenly felt strangely calm. I wrapped the towel around me and sat on the cold tile, watching the water spread in irregular streaks. I could hear my own breathing slow and steady, like I was counting the minutes. I tried calling out once more. No response, only the sitcom laughs from the living room. When the imaginary clock in my head finished its first full circle, I knew more than an hour had passed. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. I didn't understand what I was being punished for using water or simply existing. That first night, I curled up in the dark, listening to the pipes knock like a heartbeat. The old smell of tile, dampness, and leftover soap mixed together. I drank from the faucet, the metallic taste cold and bitter. I bit my lip so I wouldn't cry. On the second day, my head swam, my lips cracked, my hands went numb. I heard Alyssa walk by. Her voice drifted back. She must have learned her lesson. Cole said nothing. Not one objection. Not one question about whether I was even alive. But in the hunger and the humiliation, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. I've lived through loss, through the loneliness of widowhood, through freezing nights without enough heat. Nothing could break me. No one could keep me locked up forever, especially not in my own house. And when the door opened on the morning of the third day, Alyssa looked at me blankly and said, "Next time, learn to save." Cole stood behind her, avoiding my eyes. I just nodded. No words. No tears. I walked past them, hair wet, bare feet, back to my room. I shut the door and took a deep breath. On the table was the safe key. Morning light fell across the desk and lit up the framed deed. I smiled, not with bitterness, but with someone who had just found her strength again. I whispered to myself, "You turned the lock, but I'm the one holding the key." And from that moment on, the quiet plan to leave and take everything back began to form. I still remember that February morning air, so cold it cut the skin, frost on the porch, and the phone ringing at 5 a.m. The doctor on the line, voice hoarse, said that Edward, my husband, didn't survive his second heart attack. I sat frozen at the kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee in front of me that suddenly tasted like nothing. The house felt too big, too quiet. Down the hall, Cole, only 8 years old, slept soundly, unaware that from that day on our world had changed forever. I watched him breathe, his little cheeks rising and falling, and whispered a promise I've never broken. "I will not let you go hungry. I will not let you. I feel alone." That vow kept me standing through every year that followed. I packed away my tears, dried my face, and the next day went out to find work. In the mornings, I cleaned a small office downtown. Hands used to holding a soup ladle now pushed a mop. The smell of cleaning chemicals stuck to my hair and skin, impossible to wash off even after 2 showers. In the afternoons, I worked the register at a corner store, standing 10 hours, smiling at every customer even as my feet swelled. At night I did mending under a dim yellow lamp, stitches blurring as my eyes burned. Every time I looked at our wedding photo on the wall, I told myself, it's okay, as long as Cole has enough food and books. There were winter days when snow slowed the buses, and I got home near midnight. My fingers numb, lips cracked, but the moment I heard my boy whisper, "Mom?" the house felt warm again. I lit the stove, reheated the soup, and split the meal, the only piece of meat always in Cole's bowl. Mine was just broth and a few slices of potato. I never felt deprived. Watching him eat well made me feel full. Years later, I can still smell the wood burning in the fireplace, hear the spoon scraping the pot, feel his small hand on mine as he said, "Mom, I'll take care of you someday." Promise. I believed him with all my heart. I gave up small things women enjoy: new clothes, lipstick, a salon visit to spare a few more dollars for my son. When Cole hit high school and wanted to play baseball, I picked up an overnight warehouse shift to buy him a glove and cleats. Every time I saw him suited up on the field, pride brought me to tears. I thought, if Edward were here, he'd be smiling just like I was. Every birthday, even when I barely had anything left, I baked him a little cake. Once, I scraped together leftover flour, mixed in some sugar, and used our old rusty oven. When I lit the candle, he blew it out and grinned. "Mom, this is the best cake in the world." I laughed and turned away so he wouldn't see my tears of happiness. I thought, as long as he grows up kind, every sacrifice is worth it. But life rarely plays fair. After Cole went to college, I thought I could rest a bit. Tuition cost more than I imagined. I didn't want him buried in debt. I picked up a morning cleaning job at the library and a temporary cashier shift at a small neighborhood supermarket. At night, I did extra mending and fixed neighbors' jeans. Some mornings I fell asleep at the kitchen table, a spoon's imprint on my cheek. But when I read his letters from school, telling me his GPA was high, I found the strength to keep going. I only wished that one day Cole would graduate, find a good job, start a family, and be able to take care of himself. At graduation, I sat in the stands, clutching his diploma in its wrinkled envelope. I cried tears of joy, because everything I'd worked for had taken shape. I thought, maybe Edward was watching from somewhere, smiling. After the ceremony, Cole hugged me tight. I still remember that hug, heartbeat for heartbeat. "Mom, I'm here because of you." I thought those words would stay with me for life, but maybe that was the moment I made my mistake. I thought love and sacrifice naturally grow gratitude. I didn't know that when kindness has no boundaries, it teaches others to see it as obligation. In the years after Cole started working, I still didn't slow down. I kept waking at 5 a.m., making coffee and breakfast, waiting for his footsteps on the stairs. I still asked, "What do you want to eat?" like he was still 8. I didn't realize I'd raised in him the habit of being served, not the habit of sharing. I still remember the dinner when Cole turned 30. He brought Alyssa over to meet me. I cooked all day: pot roast, salad, pie, the dishes Edward used to love. When they arrived, I was waiting at the door, hands still dusty with flour. Alyssa hugged me and said sweetly, "Mom, Lila, Cole says you're the best cook in the city." I laughed, warmth flooding my chest. I thought, how wonderful my son has found someone who appreciates him. But during that meal, when I put a piece of meat on Cole's plate, Alyssa gently set her hand on mine and said, in a voice soft as a feather, "Mom, let me take care of him, okay?" I nodded, thinking nothing of it. But that night, for the first time, I noticed my own plate was untouched when they had already finished eating. I'd been busy watching my son, busy talking, and forgot to eat. No one noticed. And strangely, that very dinner was when I first felt I was missing my share. In the years after Cole married Alyssa, I kept thinking she just needed time to adjust. I believed love would help people understand one another. I thought if I gave a little more, the family would be peaceful. I never imagined that very willingness to yield would teach them how to keep pushing the line. Once, a neighbor said to me, "Mrs. Lila, you're too gentle." When kids get used to being pampered, they start treating it like a right. I only smiled. He's my only son. How could I be angry with him? Looking back now, I see I was wrong from that very moment. I thought I could use affection to fight selfishness, use tolerance to dissolve ingratitude. But kindness without boundaries is nothing more than an invitation for others to step over yours. All those years of working myself to exhaustion, I never imagined the money I sweated for, the pieces of cake I split to save for my son, would one day become someone else's fancy dinner, one where I no longer had a seat. I spent my life making sure Cole lacked nothing: food, clothes, love. What I failed to teach him was how to value those things. And maybe that was the first mistake that led to all the tragedies that followed. Cole's wedding took place on an early summer afternoon in the little backyard where Edward had built a wooden swing for our boy when he was 5. I spent a whole month preparing, repainting the fence, trimming the apple tree, washing every curtain. I wanted everything perfect for my son's big day. Cole wore a navy suit and looked mature and confident. Alyssa, in a simple, elegant white dress, made my heart pinch a little. She was so beautiful, radiant, as if every light pointed toward her. When the music started, I stood in the very last row, holding a small bouquet. I watched my son walk down the aisle, eyes shining, and told myself, "You've truly grown up." In that moment, I believed every hardship, every year of toil had meaning. After the ceremony at the small backyard reception, Cole took my hand and said, "Mom, I wouldn't be here without you." I smiled, and for a moment all the tired years melted away. I looked around the house where his childhood laughter once echoed and knew I was about to hand it to the next generation. When the guests had left, I placed an envelope on the dining table inside were the house papers. I said, "This house is yours. I want you two to have a solid start." Alyssa froze, eyes brimming, and Cole hugged me tight. But there was one thing I didn't say. The deed was still in my name. Not because I didn't trust my son, but because Edward's old attorney had once advised me to keep ownership until necessary. He called it a legal spare key for when life doesn't go as planned. At the time, I never thought I'd need it. I moved into the small room at the end of the hallway, where light only slipped in through a tiny window facing the backyard. I brought a few of my things: Edward's armchair, the wooden box of documents, and our wedding photo. I wanted the young couple to have their own space. I cooked for myself, did my own laundry, and tried to keep myself small and quiet, like a guest renting a room in my own house. At first, Alyssa was very sweet. She called me Mom, asked what I liked to eat, even made me a cup of afternoon tea now and then. I thought I was lucky to have such a considerate daughter-in-law. I helped them decorate the living room, reorganize the kitchen, tidy the yard, and felt happy to still be useful. Then the gentle words shifted into constant little reminders. "Mom, could you turn the TV off earlier? It's a bit loud." "Mom, this bone broth smells great, but the scent spreads all over the house." Or, "Mom, your slippers are a little off. I'm afraid someone might trip." At first, I didn't mind. I figured she just wanted the place neat. But when those comments repeated day after day, I began to feel like a clumsy guest in the very place I had built. Cole, as usual, chose silence. Whenever I looked a little down or drifted away, he only said, "Mom, don't worry about it. Alyssa's just particular." "I just want a peaceful house." I heard "let it go" to keep the peace so often it became routine. I tried to be patient. I got up earlier, turned off the TV sooner, cooked separate dishes with less smell. I always believed silence kept the peace. I'd been through a long marriage. I knew when to avoid conflict. But silence, stretched too long, becomes an invisible wall, and once it's up, it's hard to tear down. One evening, I heard Alyssa on the phone in the living room, her voice sweet but tinged with fatigue. "You know, living with your mother-in-law isn't easy. She's nice, but it still feels like this is her house." I stood still behind the door, dish towel in hand. I wasn't angry. I just felt cold. Yes, this house was mine. But her words made me realize in her eyes I was someone who'd stayed too long and refused to leave. I pulled back. I avoided the living room, cooked when they were at work, cleaned when they slept. At dinner, I'd leave my portion on the table and eat later in my room. I didn't want anyone to have to put up with my presence anymore. Sometimes Cole came into my room, sat down, and asked a few polite questions. "Mom, you doing okay? Do you need anything?" I always answered, "I'm fine." I didn't want to bother him. But the painful truth was that the warm bond between us had thinned into pure obligation. I still remember a late night while I was folding laundry. Alyssa walked in, her usual small smile gone. "Mom, I think we should do our own laundry. Thank you, but we want to get used to doing it ourselves." I nodded and swallowed a sigh. After she left, I stared at the half-folded clothes. For the first time in years, I felt truly unnecessary. Even so, I kept my Sunday morning tea habit. I made 3 cups and set them on the kitchen table. 2 always stayed full. One morning, Alyssa looked at me, smiled, and said, light but sharp, "Mom, you don't have to worry about that. Cole and I will get coffee out. You should rest." The door closed, leaving 2 cups of tea to go cold. I sat down and watched the steam disappear, my heart feeling hollow. A neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, once stopped by and saw me sweeping the porch. She said, "Mrs. Lila, the house is lively now, but why do I rarely see them talk with you?" I forced a smile. "Young people are busy, Mrs. Peterson. They have their own lives." It sounded calm, but only I knew how tight my throat felt saying it. At night, I sat in Edward's old armchair, watching the living room light leak through the door crack. I could hear them talking, laughing, sometimes discussing remodel plans. "Once," Alyssa said, "if we knock out the wall by the room at the end of the hall, the bedroom will be bigger. The room at the end of the hall, my room." I heard Cole answer softly, "It's okay. Mom will want her own place eventually." My chest tightened, but I still didn't cry. I just clasped my hands together like I was holding on to the last of my dignity. I used to think love was the strongest bond, but love can rot in silence like an old boat that doesn't split open, just slowly takes on water until it sinks. I chose silence because I was afraid of losing my son. I was afraid that speaking up would crack everything beyond repair. I didn't realize that one person's silence is often mistaken by others as consent. And that supposed consent made them believe they could say and do anything, even lock me in a bathroom for 2 full days, inside a house where every brick bears my fingerprints. On the first autumn evening after their wedding, I flipped on the hallway light like always. With age, my eyesight has faded, so when I go to the kitchen at night, I leave a small lamp on a soft yellow glow that keeps me from tripping. But that night, the light snapped off the moment I stepped out. From the living room, Alyssa's voice came steady and cold. "Electricity isn't free, Mom." I froze. The words weren't loud, but they fell into my ears like steady drops on stone, not strong enough to break it, but sharp enough to sting. I smiled faintly, telling myself she was just reminding me. I didn't respond, just slipped back to my bed, an emptiness I couldn't explain spreading inside me. The next morning, I made tea early. The water was warm, not hot like usual. I tried to turn up the heater but realized the temperature had been lowered. When I asked, Alyssa just smiled. "I adjusted it to save energy, Mom. Good for the environment." I nodded and didn't argue. I like saving too. But in her voice I heard something else, as if I'd been lectured, not included. Little things like that kept popping up, like pebbles tossed into a still pond. I folded their bath towels. Alyssa opened them, refolded, and said gently, "Mom, these should be folded in thirds, not halves." I loaded the washer. She told me I used the wrong amount of water. I started the dishwasher. She frowned. "Mom, plates should go in straight rows, not at an angle. The water won't reach evenly." Each time, I apologized, smiled, and said, "I'll remember." I thought I was keeping the peace, but the way Alyssa nodded, pursed her lips, and turned away made me feel like a clumsy housemaid, not the homeowner. That night, as I passed the hall, I overheard them in the kitchen. "She still thinks this is her house." Alyssa's voice wasn't overtly mean, just tired. But that "still thinks" sliced deep. I leaned against the wall and swallowed hard. I wanted to walk in, smile, and say, "Yes, it is my house." But I couldn't. I just stood there, listening to pans clatter and sauce simmer, then went back to my room and closed the door softly. The next morning, I went to the yard. I cut the grass, wiped the patio table, and replaced the faucet gasket, little jobs Edward used to do. Sweat stuck to my shirt and my hands ached, but in the work I felt useful. When Alyssa came home, I greeted her with a smile and said, "I changed the leaky kitchen gasket so the water runs stronger now." She gave a short reply. "Oh, Mom, you don't need to do that. We were going to call a repairman." Then she headed straight upstairs. I stood there looking at my hands' thin, calloused fingers, nails stained with rubber dust. I didn't understand why my kindness now seemed to annoy people. I realized Alyssa had started setting little rules. First it was lights, then water, then food. She said, "Mom, don't buy whole milk anymore. Cole and I only drink almond. Please get your own kind so there's no mix-ups." I nodded. I only need a little milk for my morning tea, but that "so there's no mix-ups" felt like a label slapped on me. Another day, she taped a sheet to the fridge. "House rules, keep it clean, save resources, respect personal space." At the bottom were both their signatures. I stared at that paper for a long time. It didn't mention me, but it felt like it was speaking directly to me. Cole was the same, silent. His silence had its own tone. Not indifference, but compromise. Every time I tried to bring something up, he just smiled. "Mom, Alyssa worries about small stuff. Don't take it to heart." I couldn't tell whether to be sad that my son wouldn't defend me or sad that he thought I was too weak to defend myself. I started storing everything in my memory, each look, each tone, each sigh. Not to hold a grudge, but to stop lying to myself that things would get better. I've spent years waiting for things to get better, and I know that if you don't stop the bad, it only gets worse. One evening, Alyssa invited friends over for dinner. I wasn't told ahead of time. When I came downstairs, she'd already set the table, scented candles burning, soft jazz playing. I smiled and said, "Oh, a party? Let me help set up." She shook her head, still smiling. "No need, Mom. Please relax, we've got it." I turned away, but as I reached the stairs, I heard one of her friends whisper, "You live with your mother-in-law?" Alyssa laughed, a hint of mockery. "Yeah, but she's so gentle you almost don't notice she's around." The group burst out laughing. I froze on the step, hand gripping the banister. "Almost don't notice she's around" sounded like a compliment, but it smelled of erasure. After the party, they laughed and talked late into the night. I couldn't sleep. I heard glasses clinking, high heels tapping on the wood floor. I remembered parties years ago, when Cole's friends came over and I baked cookies, poured lemonade, laughter ringing through the house. Now, all I heard was my own breathing in a small room, the hallway light still off. The next morning I went to the kitchen and found the table full of dirty glasses. I washed them all and wiped everything spotless, leaving no trace. When Alyssa woke up, she looked surprised. "Mom, you didn't have to do that. I was going to clean up." I just smiled. "It's okay, I'm used to getting up early." But from then on, she'd I started watching everything I did. If I did the laundry, she'd redo it. If I cooked something, she'd say they already ate out. I was turning into a shadow in my own house. Another night, I heard Cole and Alyssa talking in the living room. The door wasn't fully closed, and I clearly heard Alyssa say, "I just feel uncomfortable with her staying here forever. This is our home, but everything still feels arranged by her. Even the way it smells is hers." Cole answered softly, "I know, but I don't want to hurt my mom." Alyssa let out a light laugh. "Hurt her? She probably doesn't even notice." I went back to my room and shut the door. I sat on the bed and stared at the ceiling. I didn't cry, but something inside me, a small, quiet part, snapped. The next day, I stopped turning on the hallway light. I walked in the dark, one hand tracing the wall. I didn't want to hear electricity isn't free again. I didn't run the water heater too long, didn't fold towels the way I always had, didn't use scented fabric softener. I lived like a renter, tiptoeing in the very house I paid for. But from that point on, something else began to form in me, a clear, alert record. I remembered not to resent, but to stop deceiving myself with Alyssa's just tired or Cole's stuck in the middle. No, I understood. People who've been loved too much often never learn to value it. I looked back at what I'd done, gifting the house, cooking, quietly helping, and realized my overkindness might have taught them they had the right to look down on me. I didn't react, argue, or raise my voice. I simply noted every sign of contempt, like someone collecting evidence even they don't yet realize they're producing. Because deep down, I knew every slight, no matter how small, is a warning before the storm. And I, Lila Whitmore, had started to hear the wind rise. That afternoon, the wind swept through the backyard, carrying the smell of dry leaves and damp soil. I stood by the wooden fence, rubber mallet in hand, trying to replace a few warped boards after last week's rain. Fall in Virginia always has a sneaky chill, not enough to bite but enough to swell the joints so that every strike of the nail sent a sting up my wrist. I worked slowly, carefully, the way Edward used to. He always told me, "Don't let things sit broken too long. Lila, fix them while you can." When I set the last board, the sun had slipped behind the trees, leaving a wash of pale orange across the ground. The wind turned sharper, my back burned, my calloused hands stiffened. I took a deep breath, inhaled the scent of fresh-cut wood, and went inside. My whole body ached, sweat and dust clinging to my shirt. All I could think about was a hot shower to loosen my tight shoulders. The bathroom was small, steam fogging the mirror quickly. I turned on the warm water and stood still, letting it run down my back slowly, like it was washing away months of silence layered over the house. Not even 10 minutes later, I heard footsteps growing heavy in the hall. The first pounding hit like thunder. "How much longer, Mom?" Alyssa's voice cold and sharp as steel. I startled and answered through the steam, "Just a moment, I'm almost done." No reply, only a sigh. Then a few seconds later, it came the dry, decisive sound of the lock turning from the outside. I spun around, wet hands shaking on the knob. I pulled hard. Nothing. I called out, "Alyssa, what's going on?" "Open the door." Silence. Only the TV from the living room, silverware clinking, laughter. I called louder, this time to Cole. "Cole, do you hear me? Open the door for Mom." No answer. Just a short laugh, then a sitcom theme swelling. I pounded the door over and over, only to get the dull clank of metal in return. The door felt colder than the water on my skin. I stood still, chest heaving, stunned and disbelieving. For a moment I wanted to think it was a mistake, a prank, or some lesson they thought I needed. But minute after long minute, I knew this wasn't a joke. I wrapped the towel around me and sat on the floor. The tile was freezing, damp soaking through the towel and into my bones. I listened to them chat outside Alyssa's even tone, Cole's responses like nothing was happening. Every laugh sliced through the trust I'd spent a lifetime protecting. I shouted a few more times. Then I went quiet. Silence wasn't a choice anymore, it was survival. I leaned my head back against the wall, closed my eyes, and tried to breathe slowly. I thought of Edward, of my years as a single mother, of the promise I made long ago. I vowed my son would never go without, never imagined I would be starved and locked up by that very child. Now I understood the cruelest betrayal isn't shouting, it's absolute indifference. That first night, all I had was the cold trickle from the faucet. I drank a few sips, the metallic tang sharp and bitter. Hunger twisted my stomach, but I didn't knock again. I sat still, listening to the fridge door close, footsteps passing by. They went to bed. The whole house fell silent. I curled up on the tile, my back throbbing, my heartbeat fading. I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the pipes reminded me I was being held. Once I heard Cole walk by, keys jingling, then stop outside the bathroom. I thought he would open the door. He didn't. A few seconds of quiet, then his footsteps drifted away. By morning, a sliver of light slipped under the door. My head felt heavy, lips dry, hands shaking. I forced myself up and looked in the mirror, hair a mess, hollow cheeks, red eyes. I gave a thin smile. A mother locked in her own house. Who would believe it? I called out again. No response. I heard dishes, smelled coffee drifting in through the crack. Then the front door slammed. They left for work. I was alone with the silence. The bathroom became my whole world, small, cramped, and cold. I had no clock, so I counted time by my heartbeat and the number of cars passing outside. By noon, I slid to the floor, dizzy with hunger. I pressed my forehead to the cold wall and closed my eyes, trying to steady myself. Alyssa's words from the day before looped in my head. She still thinks this is her house. Yes, I did think so. Maybe that's exactly why I was being kept like an intruder. By evening, I heard them return, the door opening, footsteps, then familiar laughter. I wanted to scream, to pound the door until my hands bled, but I didn't. I stayed still. There's no point explaining to people who don't want to hear. On the second night, my stomach growled in waves. I drank from the tap to dull the hunger. Wind hissed through the tiny window above, cold air raising goosebumps on my skin. I trembled, but didn't cry. I thought how strange it is that people become clearest when pushed to their limits. I remembered the factory days when I was young, hands raw and still smiling, thinking as long as my boy was okay, it was enough. I'd lived my whole life for other people and never thought about defending myself. But here, in this mildewed bathroom, I understood. If I didn't stand up and reclaim my dignity, all those years would mean nothing. When I closed my eyes, I saw Edward in my mind. He stood by the fence, smiling. "Lila, don't let anyone treat you like you don't matter." I opened my eyes. My palms were cold, but my heart felt strangely warm. I wasn't afraid anymore. I didn't beg. I didn't pound the door. I let time pass, let them think I'd surrendered. In the silence, I made a plan. If they used a lock to teach me to save, I would use the law to teach them limits. I started observing the time the door opened each morning, the jingle of keys on the table, when they left, when their steps returned at night. I stored every detail in my head. I would need it later. On the morning of the third day, the lock clicked again, this time in reverse. The door cracked and light slipped in. Alyssa appeared, phone in hand, her voice casual like nothing had happened. "Next time, don't waste water, Mom." She turned away without waiting for an answer. Cole stood in the living room with his back to me. No look, no concern. I stepped out, water dripping from my hair, feet freezing on the floor. I walked past them like a ghost, back to my room, and shut the door. I sat on the edge of the bed, fingers touching the old safe key. The first feeling wasn't anger, it was clarity. A frightening kind of clarity, the kind that lets you see exactly where the limits of your tolerance end. I don't know how long I sat there. I only know that when the morning light slanted through the curtain, I had a clear decision. There would not be a second time. I wouldn't say anything. I wouldn't cry, wouldn't tell the neighbors, wouldn't beg Cole to realize his mistake. I used to believe in family ties, but from now on, I believe in justice. If they think they can lock me up in this house, they've forgotten the owner of this house is still me. On the third morning, the lock turned with a short, dry, decisive click. The door opened and light rushed in, making me blink. The early chill swept into the bathroom, mixed with the smell of old soap and mildew. Alyssa stood in the doorway, hair tied back, phone in hand, voice even and flat. "Next time, don't waste water, Mom." No guilty look. No apology, just a sentence that fell light as dust and heavy as lead. Cole stood behind her, leaning on the wall, eyes glued to the TV. As I walked past, he didn't look up or say a word. For a second, I saw his hand clench the remote, knuckles white, and then release like nothing happened. I didn't speak, didn't look, didn't let them see a drop of water on my face. I wrapped the towel tight, walked down the long hallway, each step on the cold floor, feeling like I was leaving a prison. I didn't look back. No one deserved to see my eyes then, not angry, not hurt, but utterly indifferent. In my room, I sat down, opened the small drawer. The safe key lay still in my palm, its dull metallic shine catching the morning light. That cold metal felt like it was breathing with me. I took a deep breath and felt my heartbeat slow and steady. I pulled a small sheet of paper from the desk and carefully wrote 5 lines, neat and firm. 1. Confirm ownership. 2. Call the lawyer. 3. Find a discreet buyer. 4. Create my own account. 5. Disappear. I folded the paper in half and tucked it into Edward's old notebook between 2 yellowed pages. It wasn't a revenge list. It was a survival plan. That morning, I made tea like usual. Alyssa and Cole ate in silence, spoons tapping porcelain with a sound like metal scraping glaze. I set the kettle on the table and asked, "Cole, it's cold today. Remember your coat?" He just nodded, eyes never leaving his phone. Alyssa sipped her coffee, glanced at me, and looked away. "No, thank you." I still smiled, calm as if nothing had happened. The chill in that house no longer came from the weather, but from the silence of 3 people living together with no connection left. By day, I did everything the same, watering plants, wiping tables, washing dishes. I let the water run just enough, turned lights on and off exactly on schedule, earlier than usual. I followed their rules perfectly, because I understood, if you want to leave quietly, you first play the role of the compliant one. At noon, when they left for work, I shut my door and drew the curtains. I opened the safe, the lock clicked. Soft but loud in the stillness. Inside were the things I'd kept for years: the house title, Edward's life insurance policy, savings book, and several bank statements I'd hidden well, all in my name, clearly signed, fully legal. I held the property certificate in my palm and stared at the bold letters, Lila Whitmore, my signature. At the bottom, strong and even dated nearly 20 years ago, a feeling both wry and peaceful rose in my chest. All these years they lived in my house, but it never truly belonged to them. I read every page, missing nothing. The deed, property tax papers, fire insurance, bank agreements, everything in order. I even found a copy of Edward's old insurance policy. I thought it was lost. In the margin, he had once written a small note by hand, "For Lila, who knows the value of effort more than anyone." I touched that line lightly. A small smile came to my lips, not happiness, but the smile of someone who's found her backbone again. By afternoon, I walked to the post office. On the way, leafless trees shook in the wind, and my shoes knocked against the pavement, slow but steady. I emailed Edward's old lawyer. He was still alive, still working at a small office near the courthouse. I didn't explain everything, just wrote briefly, "I want to reconfirm the property ownership registered in 2005. Please check it for me as soon as possible." That evening, I got home before they did and cooked a small pot of chicken soup, fragrant with celery and black pepper. When Alyssa walked in, she seemed surprised by the smell but said nothing. I set 3 bowls on the table and invited them. The silence stretched so long I could hear each tick of the wall clock. I ate slowly without looking at them. With every spoonful, I felt a sheet of ice forming in my chest, cold but firm. Night fell, they shut their door, and I opened the safe again. I took out my small notebook and added details to the plan. 1. Call the lawyer back after his response. 2. Contact the discreet broker, the one who sold Mrs. Peterson's old house. 3. Check the limits for international transfers. 4. Open a separate account under my maiden name, Lila Moore. I paused, staring at the 4 lines, pen still in hand. A tear fell onto the page, not from sadness, but because freedom had begun to sprout. In the days that followed, I kept living as if nothing had changed. I still smiled when I saw them, still asked Cole, "Work okay, son?" Still answered, "Sleep well," when Alyssa tossed out a quick goodnight. But inside, I was no longer the woman afraid to bother anyone, afraid to upset her son. I had become an observer, quiet and clear. On the 4th morning, I received a reply from the law office. The ownership verification was freshly stamped, clearly listing me as the sole owner of the house. I folded it and slipped it into my purse. In that moment, I felt a strange peace, not the thrill of victory, but the calm of someone who has taken back control of her life. That evening, when Alyssa opened the fridge and complained, "Why did you buy so much milk?" I simply answered, "I'm used to it. It'll be gone soon." She didn't realize there was another meaning in it. Soon wasn't just the milk, it was everything between us. Late at night, I tidied my room. I gathered a few essentials: the photo album, Edward's wedding ring, a small jewelry box, a few important papers. I packed everything into a small suitcase, then sat by the bed and listened to the wind at the window frame. In the quiet, I saw something simple. The moment they locked me in the bathroom, they didn't just imprison my body, they unlocked someone else in me. Someone who knows blind patience isn't a virtue, it's self-bondage. Someone who understands some battles don't need shouting, only a signature at the right time. I sat still, looking at my reflection in the mirror. The warm yellow light fell across my face, lines deep around my eyes. But this time I didn't look tired. I saw a woman who had finally woken up after a decades-long sleep. I smiled and placed a hand over my chest, feeling a slow, strong heartbeat. In my mind, the 5 steps glowed as clearly as the old hallway light I once turned off to keep others comfortable. Now I switched it back on, just to light the way for myself. 2 days later, I put on a light gray wool coat, wrapped a dark scarf, and stepped out at 8 a.m. January wind in Virginia sliced through, stinging my cheeks like a reminder. Stay sharp, don't tremble. I called a cab to the law office where Edward had worked with Mr. Harold Benson, the man who helped us write our will, buy the house, and keep our documents straight for 20 years. When I walked in, Mr. Benson looked up, surprised. The same kind face, hair nearly all white, thin glasses slipping down his nose. "My goodness, Lila Whitmore, it's been a long time," he said, voice rough but warm. "Edward would be smiling somewhere, knowing you've kept everything this orderly." I gave a small smile and set the file on his desk. "I need you to reconfirm the house ownership, and I may need help selling it quietly." His eyes shifted, not in surprise but in understanding. He opened the file and read every page carefully. After a few minutes, he nodded. "Everything's clean and fully in your name. I'll arrange a private transaction, no sign, no public listing." Just a few weeks to complete. I exhaled lightly, like a knot had been loosened from my throat. He looked up with a half smile. I don't need to know what happened, but if you're going to leave, leave with your head high, and make sure no one knows the closing date. I nodded. That's exactly what I'll do. Leaving the law office, I stopped by the bank. No one paid attention to an older woman with a small purse and a steady gaze. I opened a brand new account entirely in my name, with only my signature authorized. The clerk asked, "Would you like to link it to your existing accounts?" I smiled and shook my head. "No, thank you. This one is for personal matters." I also requested a small trust account overseas and moved a portion of Edward's old insurance into it, enough to live comfortably for years, but not so much that anyone at home would be suspicious if they saw a statement. From that day on, every morning I withdrew a small amount of cash, no more than $500, just enough to look like ordinary spending. I tucked it into envelopes and hid them at the bottom of my suitcase, cushioned by old sweaters. I once read that when you want to disappear without notice, the key isn't where you go, it's leaving quietly, in steps so reasonable no one notices. I came home as if I'd just run errands. Alyssa was watering plants on the porch. She saw me and said, "Mom, out early today?" I answered lightly. "Went to the bank to pay the car insurance." She just said, "Uh-huh," and turned away. No more questions. Everything went on like that, quiet, steady like a clock. I kept my old routine: coffee at 7 a.m., watering orchids at 10 a.m., cooking my own meals in the afternoon. I showed them nothing unusual. If anything had changed, it was only the calm in my voice. Every evening, Alyssa chatted on the phone in the kitchen. She often mentioned remodel plans. One day, while I was stacking dishes, she said to someone offhand, "Probably this summer we'll gut the kitchen. That wall is ancient." I froze. Gut the kitchen? The kitchen where I spent thousands of mornings cooking for my husband and son, where a tiny burn mark still sits on the counter from when Cole baked at 10 years old. I looked at Alyssa, nodded, and said softly, "That's fine, as long as you like it." She didn't know that every time she said gut, I heard the crack of the past breaking. That night in my room, I opened the safe and checked the documents again. I added one more line to the plan. Day 18, sign the sale contract. Day 21, transfer complete. Day 24, leave. 3 weeks. Only 3 weeks left. I closed the safe, locked it, then sat on the bed, hands wrapped around a cup of cold tea. I looked around the small room. Each item I'd bought with my own hands: the purple floral curtains Edward chose, our wedding photo, the vase of dried flowers by the window. I knew that soon I would leave it all. Instead of sadness, I felt light. The next day, when Cole went to work, Alyssa sat in the living room with her laptop open, searching for kitchen inspo. She called me over in a syrupy voice. "Mom, do you think these tiles match?" I love that Scandinavian white and gray look, so classy. I looked at the screen, a gleaming, unfamiliar kitchen with no warmth at all. I nodded. "It's pretty, Alyssa. It suits you too." Inside, a different smile bloomed, the smile of someone watching others paint on a board that's about to be wiped clean. That evening, Cole talked about a Hawaii vacation. He was excited, said he'd take 2 weeks off and bring Alyssa along, "So you can rest at home." I answered, "Great idea. I'll watch the house." They both smiled and thanked me. They had no idea the day they boarded that plane would be the day I left their lives. I began moving in order, like a chess game. Every move calculated, no rushing, no missteps. I tidied my room, tossed unneeded papers, destroyed old bills that could reveal information. I took a few items to the charity shop, part habit, part making space in my luggage. On the 8th morning, I got a confirmation email. The house sale contract has been prepared. All procedures are legal. Waiting only for the signing date. I read it 3 times, then deleted the message, leaving no trace. That night, I sat in the dark living room with only one small lamp on. Alyssa and Cole were arguing about savings, but their voices faded. It all sounded like echoes from another world, the one I was about to leave. I sipped cold tea, watching the lamplight reflected on the wooden table, oddly indifferent. Every feeling, hurt, anger, bitterness, seemed to have frozen into a clear sheet of ice. On the outside, I looked like any other elderly mother. On the inside, I was counting moves in a silent game. I knew their habits precisely: when they left, when they returned, when the TV went on, when they slept. I learned to walk so lightly the floor wouldn't creak, to speak just enough so they'd think I was still obedient. A woman once locked in a bathroom for 2 days now held the controls again, and no one noticed. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the one finishing the game with precise moves. When Alyssa showed off the new kitchen render and Cole went on about Hawaii, I just nodded. Inside, I smiled a discreet, cool smile because I knew they were investing effort into a house that, in only 3 weeks, wouldn't be theirs. 3 weeks. 3 weeks for me to play the kind mother, the calm grandmother. 3 weeks to prepare for closing that door one last time, this time from the outside. One late February morning, fog veiled the road as I rode a taxi to the law office. Cold air slid through the window crack, carrying the usual metallic scent of traffic. I looked out the glass as bare trees slipped by, my heart strangely calm. After so many years, I was finally doing what I should have done long ago, deciding my own life. Attorney Harold greeted me with a small smile and a knowing nod. "That young couple is very discreet," he said. "Paying cash, no loan. I've checked their background, decent and trustworthy." I simply said, "I trust you." On the desk, the file was neatly stacked, not a single extra page. Everything had been reviewed: ownership verification, transfer contract, property handover documents. He handed me a pen with glossy black ink and said slowly, "All I need is your signature here, Lila. After today, this house will no longer be connected to you." I looked at the printed name, Lila Whitmore, bold and straight. My hand trembled slightly, not from doubt, but because years of bottled emotions were about to be released. I set the pen down and signed clean and decisive. As the pen lifted from the paper, I felt like I'd just closed a book I'd been reading too long, so long I'd forgotten I could put it down. "The transaction will be complete within 72 hours, Harold said, carefully gathering the documents. "The funds will go straight to your account. I'll hold the keys and hand them to the buyers the very morning you leave." I nodded. "Thank you, Harold. And please don't inform anyone." "Of course," he replied, quiet but firm. Disappearing deserves the same protection as privacy. When I stepped outside, the sun had broken through. Light touched my silver hair, and everything felt feather-light. I paused on the sidewalk, watched people hurry by, then walked into the cafe across the street. A hot cappuccino arrived, foam thick and smooth. I took a sip. The sweet bitterness slid down my throat. For the first time in years, I felt a morning that truly belonged to me. By afternoon, I was home. Alyssa was on the phone. Cole was sprawled on the couch. I smiled and walked past like any other day. No one noticed a thing. In my room, I opened my laptop and searched for a faraway coastal town, Mariners Bay, Oregon. A small, quiet place with a green bay and rows of wooden houses. I read the description. A town of wind, where people come to start over. I chose an early morning flight one way, no return. I booked a small seaside room, a pale blue house with a white porch, less than 100 yards from the sand. The owner, a middle-aged woman, messaged back warmly, "Your room will be ready. Just bring the sunshine." I smiled. It had been a long time since anyone said something so kind to me. That night, while they watched TV, I slipped into my room and opened the wardrobe. The old suitcase brown leather, the one Edward bought when we were poor, lay at the bottom. I wiped off the dust, opened it, and folded each item slowly. A few simple, outfits, a wool sweater, walking shoes, and the small wooden box holding Edward's wedding ring. I placed it on top, the final keepsake of a lifetime. I added an envelope of cash and a small document pouch with what I needed: passport, insurance paperwork, bank statements, everything fit snugly inside. I pulled the zipper, the small click sounding both familiar and new, like fate snapping shut. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the room. The room where I slept after my husband died, where I held my feverish boy through the night, where I believed love could conquer anything. Now it was just a temporary stop. I felt no regret, only lightness. I texted the woman at the corner grocery, Mrs. Peterson, who always set aside a small bottle of milk for me in the mornings. "Thank you for your kindness all these years. If I ever come back, I'll stop by." I didn't mention the date. I wanted this goodbye to have no farewell. That night, I lay listening to the wind slip through the window. Branches tapped the frame, the clock ticked, and from the next room the TV murmured on. I closed my eyes. No anger, no regret. Only a calm as still as water before dawn. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. I made coffee and carefully left 2 cups for them on the table, an old habit. I watched light filter through the curtains, dust floating in the air, and knew everything was closing. I called the taxi I'd booked and confirmed the flight. The ticket was already in my coat pocket. I wrote a short note, folded it, and placed it in the drawer beside the family photo. "Thank you for the years that were once warm. Don't look for me because I've found myself." I didn't sign my name. At noon, when Alyssa and Cole went out, I sat in the living room and looked around one last time. Sunlight fell on the walls where I once hung Cole's birthday photos, where Edward's laughter used to echo. I ran my hand across the wooden table, like saying goodbye to the past. I picked up the phone and called Harold. "I've signed. The handover date stays the same, right?" "That's right," he said. "I'll pass the keys to the buyers the very morning you leave." "Good," I said evenly. "Then it's done." I hung up and looked around again. Sparrows chirped on the porch. I smiled, a rare, genuine smile not meant for anyone to see. That night I put everything in order. I turned off all the lights, leaving only the hallway nightlight, the very light I'd once been scolded for as wasting electricity. It felt warm now, like a small sign seeing me off. When I lay down, my hand brushed the wedding ring in the suitcase. I closed my eyes and told myself, tomorrow morning, I'm going. No looking back. I didn't dream. I only heard the far-off sound of wind, like the sea whispering the place waiting for me, where I would start again without having to prove anything to anyone. The most beautiful parting, I think, is leaving quietly, no explanations, no blame. Because those who hurt us will never understand the cruelest thing isn't revenge, it's disappearing when they still think you'll always be there. Dawn hadn't broken yet. The first light of day still slept behind the trees. I woke in silence, as if my body knew it was a special day. No alarm, no birds, only the sound of my own breathing, slow and steady. I sat up and gently pulled back the curtain. Outside, the street lay under a film of mist. The yellow streetlights hadn't turned off yet. Everything felt strangely peaceful, as if the world didn't know that in just a few hours an old mother would vanish from the house that once was her heart. I brewed tea, not coffee. I wanted to be clear but light. Steam rose, mint filling the quiet kitchen. I looked around the dining table, the stove, the chair where Edward used to fix his radio, so familiar, so dear, that I knew I had to leave now or I never would. When the clock struck 5 a.m., I opened the safe, took the envelope with the house keys, and sealed it carefully. I wrote one short line on the front, to Mr. Harold. Thank you for helping me close this chapter. I set the envelope on the table beside the small vase I'd arranged the night before, white orchids, my favorite. The hallway light shone across, brightening petals thin as mist. A simple scene, but enough to soften my farewell. I checked the suitcase, compact, worn, holding the rest of my life. Papers, a few clothes, the wedding ring, the photo of me with Edward and Cole when my boy was small. Everything set like a ritual. I drew the zipper. The click echoed in the quiet, like sealing fate. I put on a heavy coat and a knit scarf, then opened my door. The hallway was dark, only a sliver of light slipping from my son's room. Cole's soft snore, Alyssa's faint rustle. I paused, not from doubt, but from an old habit, making sure my loved ones were still sleeping. I didn't open their door. I just stood in the dark, listening to their breathing like a distant tide. Strangely, I felt no anger, only a quiet compassion for the version of me who believed for years that love could heal ingratitude. I looked around the hallway where the family photo still hung, the picture of me, Edward, and Cole at his graduation. In it, I'm smiling. Edward's hand rests on our son's shoulder, and Cole is looking straight at the camera, confident, bright, full of future. I touched the frame lightly, my fingertips trembling. Not from sadness, but from knowing that sometimes the beauty of a memory should only be kept in silence. I walked to the front door. The keys had already been left behind, so the lock was empty now. I tightened my grip on the suitcase handle, took a deep breath, then turned for one last look. The house was dark, except for the hallway light I'd intentionally left on. That light had once been switched off for saving electricity, but today I turned it on, not to light my way, but to remind the house that it once belonged to someone who was grateful for every brick. I smiled. Then I gently pulled the door closed. The sound was so soft it was like the last breath of a dream ending. I stood on the porch and drew in a long breath. The cold air rushed into my lungs and made me shiver, but in that chill there was a taste of freedom, the taste of early morning, of beginnings that don't need proof. At the end of the lane, the taxi was waiting. Its yellow lights glowed against the mist, a small halo in the dark. I rolled my suitcase. The wheels clicked lightly over the tiles, a steady tap-tap. Each step was a beat of farewell. I passed the flower bed where Edward once planted lavender he brought back from Tennessee. The bare, dry stems stood patiently through winter, as if they were seeing me off. At the gate, I turned my head once. Not to look, but to remember what it feels like to leave without regret. I didn't see the house, only a blur of mist around it. The hallway light spilled out faintly, like a flame about to go out. I knew once the sun rose, that light would be swallowed. But it didn't matter, what needed to be bright was already bright inside me. I walked to the car, opened the door, and sat down. The driver, a brown-skinned man with a deep voice, glanced back and asked, "Airport, right?" I nodded. "That's right. And please don't look back." He smiled lightly and asked nothing more. The car began to move. Through the window, the little street slid past, rooftops faded, then disappeared into the fog. I rested my hand on the suitcase and felt the warmth of the leather. In my mind, there was no house, no Alyssa, no Cole. Only one thought. Everything worth looking at is ahead. The highway opened up, streetlights dimming as dawn spread. I saw a blush of pink spilling across the horizon, the gentle light I'd waited for years. This time, I didn't have to wait for someone to wake me, didn't have to cook breakfast for anyone, didn't have to fear someone locking my door. I leaned back and let the wind slip in through the window crack. Dew on the glass caught the morning light, sparkling like tiny pieces of freedom. I closed my eyes and listened to the low hum of the engine like a steady heartbeat. A chapter had closed. I didn't know how long I would live in that coastal town, or whether Cole would ever look for me. Maybe it didn't matter anymore. Because for the first time in decades, I didn't belong to anyone, and no one had the right to claim me. As the car crossed the bridge, I saw the sun lift on the far side. Bright light spread across the sky, washing the water below in pink. I smiled. Leaving before dawn might be the gentlest way to end a life of entanglement. No one saw me go, no one sent me off, no one held me back, and I didn't need anyone. The trip began. No looking back. That morning, while I was on a flight headed for the Oregon coast, clouds floating below like cotton on the other side of the country, in the house I once called home, the doorbell rang 3 times. Cole stumbled out of the bedroom, hair messy, eyes still sleepy. Alyssa, wrapped in a robe with a coffee cup in hand, wore a scowl from being woken early. At the door stood a moving crew and a young couple, the man in glasses and a gray shirt, the woman in a beige dress holding a file folder. "Hello, we're the Reeds," the woman said with a gentle smile. "Per attorney Harold Benson's schedule, today is the handover." The living room air froze. Cole's eyes went wide, and Alyssa slammed her cup down so hard coffee splashed onto the wood floor. "Handover of what?" Cole rasped. "This property has completed the transfer," the man replied calmly. "We're the new owners. Here's a notarized copy of the contract." Alyssa snatched the papers and flipped through them quickly. At the bottom, my clean, familiar signature stood out. Lila Whitmore. Below it, the legal stamp with dates matching last week. No one spoke for a few seconds. Only the soft whir of the HVAC and the tick of the clock filled a room beginning to crack. Cole stammered, No way. This is my mother's house. We live here. There must be some mistake." The man with glasses answered evenly, "There's no mistake, sir. The paperwork is valid. The transaction is complete. Attorney Benson confirms all ownership has been transferred. Today is the handover, per the contract." Alyssa's face flushed crimson. She turned to her husband, voice pitching high. "Say something. How is this possible? The house is in your mom's name." Cole went silent. In his head, pieces of memory linked together the calm in my eyes, the long silences, the times I held documents without explaining, and especially that morning I woke early to make coffee and then disappeared. He rushed into the office, opened the laptop, and logged into the bank. The screen lit up. The balance in the account under Lila Whitmore was empty. The transaction history showed a large transfer out with a cold note attached. Final settlement closed. Alyssa ran through the house, yanking drawers, opening the safe. Empty. Nothing left, not even the documents they'd once hidden from me. Everything that mattered, the deed, insurance, certificates, was gone with me. Alyssa's scream echoed down the hall. "Where's the safe? Where is the safe?" Cole stood frozen, staring at the wall where the small safe used to sit, now just a square of lighter dust. His phone started ringing nonstop. An unknown number. He answered, voice shaking. "Hello, this is Cole Whitmore." A calm, professional voice replied, "Hello, I'm the secretary for attorney Harold Benson. We received your inquiry. I'm calling to confirm all transactions related to the property at 43 Maple Avenue are complete. By law, the home is now owned by Luther Every 43, the Reed family. Mrs. Lila Whitmore was the lawful seller." Cole hung up. In that moment, his world fell apart in silence. The mother he thought only knew how to endure, to stay quiet, had left not with noise or blame, but with a legal signature colder than any anger. Alyssa sank into a chair, hands clutching her head. "The kitchen deposit, $5,000, Cole." "What are we going to do?" Cole didn't answer. He walked to the window and looked out. The movers were carrying the young couple's furniture inside. Each piece crossing the threshold felt like a slap to his pride. He remembered Alyssa mocking me, the night she locked me in the bathroom, the times she said, "This is our house, not hers." Now the house wasn't theirs at all except for me, the one who chose to let it go at the right time. The new owner stepped into the living room and said politely, "We understand your surprise. But the contract is clear. Please arrange to move your belongings within 2 days. If you need more time, we can offer a temporary 2-week rental at a reduced rate." Alyssa turned pale. And Cole, for the first time, was truly silent. Not the detached silence he once used on me, but the silence of someone who realizes he's lost control. Back at the law office, Mr. Harold sent an email with the contract copy attached, and a brief note. Transaction is legal and irreversible. Any appeals must be filed through official channels. Mrs. Lila Whitmore has not provided contact information. There was no one left to call, no one to plead with. Cole's phone showed dozens of outgoing calls, all to one number. Mine. He called again and again. But on the other end, no one picked up. Only an automated voice, warm but distant. The number you have dialed is not reachable at this time. Alyssa threw her phone on the table, voice breaking. She's crazy. She can't do this. Cole answered softly, as if to himself. She can, and she did. The empty house echoed with their footsteps, the clatter of disturbed things, doors slamming. All those sounds were nothing but background music for their late lesson. Somewhere else, I was sitting on the balcony of a small room overlooking the bay. Noon sunlight winked on the water, gulls circling in flocks. My phone buzzed. Cole's name lit the screen. 1, 2, 3, then 10 calls. I didn't touch it. I let it ring, then fall quiet. In that silence, I heard the waves clearly, gentle and steady. Some apologies only matter when the listener is still there. After they leave, everything is just wind. I sipped my tea and smiled. Not a triumphant smile, but the smile of someone who has taken back control of her life. In the old house, Cole and Alyssa finally dropped onto the floor, exhausted. Alyssa turned on the faucet to wash her hands. Cold water trickled weakly. She twisted the handle to hot, and a small click sounded in the pipes. Such a tiny sound, but it startled them both. Maybe in that instant, they remembered me, the woman once locked in a bathroom, shivering in a wet towel, listening to water drip by the second. And now, every time they turn on the hot water, that click will echo as a reminder that the former controllers have lost control for good. I lifted my head toward the sea, shimmering in the late light, the breeze combing through my silver hair. Everything was settled. No need for revenge, no noise. Sometimes justice is simply leaving at the right time, letting those who remain face the emptiness they created. The coastal town welcomed me with salt on the air and cool wind, a scent only those who have stood at the ocean's edge truly know. The taxi stopped at the top of a gentle slope. Below was a row of white-painted wooden houses, windows thrown open to the morning sun, and at the end of the road, the sea spread out like a giant mirror reflecting the sky. I rolled my suitcase down, its wheels clicked over gravel, a crisp, steady rhythm, like a new breath. The innkeeper, a middle-aged woman with brown hair, a sturdy build, and a kind smile greeted me warmly. "You must be Mrs. Whitmore. Your room's on the second floor, window straight to the bay. I've set out warm blankets and a kettle." The room wasn't large, but it was quiet enough to hear waves breaking on the shore. Cream-painted wood walls, light slipping through white curtains, touching the small table beside the bed. I opened the window and let the wind in, carrying gull cries and the raw tang of salt. On the little wooden table, I placed Edward's photo, the frame I'd brought from the old house. In it, he smiles gently, pale blue eyes shining with the rare patience of a man who's known a lifetime of work and loss. I touched the glass and whispered, "I'm here, Edward. At last I've learned to stand up on my own." The next morning, sunlight spilled across the wooden floor, sparkling like shards of golden glass. I brewed coffee, not the cheap instant I used to drink, but lightly roasted beans ground fresh. The aroma filled the room and mingled with the sea breeze, a new scent that felt strangely comforting. I went to the fish market at the dock, where sun-browned men hauled nets and rinsed fish under cold water. An old fisherman, hair white as sea foam, smiled at me. "New around here? Want to try halibut or fresh salmon?" I laughed and misnamed a few fish, making him chuckle. The next day, he saved me the best cut and said, "For Mrs. Whitmore, now you know what to pick." Day by day, I learned the names of the fish and the little paths to the beach. I learned to live slower, lighter, freer. In the afternoons, I often sat at the small cafe at the bottom of the hill, the one with the crooked wooden sign that read Sea Breeze Cafe. The owner, a gray-haired woman who tied a red scarf, always saved me the window table. I read the paper, nibbled apple pie, and watched the boats come in. No one knew who I was. No one asked where I came from. And I liked it that way. I hung a small orchid, the only thing I brought from my old house, by the window. When I left, it had only a few wilted leaves. Now, under the sea sun, a fresh green shoot has popped up. I take care of it every day, the way I'm learning to take care of myself again. At night, I shower with warm water as long as I want. No more knocking on the door, no more voices talking about the water bill, no more watchful eyes. I turn on the faucet and let the steam cover my body, feeling the frozen layers inside me being washed away. The water runs warm, steady, unbroken. And I realize the sound of water is no longer the sound of confinement, but the music of freedom. That night, I sat on the balcony with a cup of mint tea. The sea darkened under the moonlight. The waves were steady, soft, but deep. Each wave seemed to whisper something I had forgotten, that loss is not always an ending. Those 2 days locked in the bathroom once felt like a scar in my memory. I thought I'd carry it for life. But now, as I listen to the waves, that pain dissolves like salt in water. I no longer tremble at the thought of a turning lock. I feel calm, because if that door hadn't been locked that day, I might never have dared to step out of a life that bound me. This town is small, but enough for someone to be reborn. Every morning, I greet the newspaper seller, the mail carrier, and the kids biking past. They call me Miss Lila, as if I've lived here forever. No one is overly curious. No one brings up the past. I feel lighter by the day, as if each sea breeze carries away a little more of the old weight. I started keeping a journal. Every night before bed, I write down the small things. Today the sea was bluer than yesterday. Today I smiled a little more. Today I brewed better coffee than the first time. I write for myself, not to tell anyone. Sometimes I turn on a small radio and listen to old songs, the kind that make me remember Edward, remember when we were young, poor, and happy. I don't cry. I just smile, because in the sound of the waves, I feel like he's right beside me, watching me learn to love life again. One morning, walking along the beach, I saw a little boy building a sandcastle. A wave rolled in and washed it away. Instead of crying, he just looked at it and started again, more carefully. The sight made me stop in my tracks. I realized some things have to collapse before we know we can rebuild them, better and stronger. Whenever I look at the ocean, I see myself in it, gentle and strong, forgiving yet boundaried. I no longer resent Cole or Alyssa. I'm simply grateful to them because they pushed me to my limit, and in doing so, I discovered I could start over at an age when people assume you only wait for rest. At night, I hear the wind press over the wooden roof, and it feels like the whole world is breathing with me. I whisper to myself, half prayer, half affirmation. Leaving isn't running away. Leaving is choosing yourself. And that's exactly it. I've chosen the rest of my life with my own 2 hands. I don't need anyone's forgiveness, anyone's recognition. I only need enough courage to keep walking, enough peace to sleep well, and enough freedom to turn on warm water every morning without fearing a knock at the door. The sea out there is still open, like a door that never locks, and I, the woman once shut in a cold bathroom, have finally found the real key to my life. One early morning, when the sun was still peeking behind the sand dunes, I woke earlier than usual. The wind carried a soft salt scent and the chatter of gulls on the wooden roof. I slipped on a light sweater, poured myself a hot coffee, and stepped onto the porch. In front of me, the ocean stretched in a pale pink of dawn, waves beating gently, like the heartbeat of someone learning to love life again. I sat in the familiar wooden chair and breathed deep. The cold slid into my lungs, then melted into warmth. I remembered it all: the mornings in the old house, Alyssa's sharp footsteps, Cole's cool eyes, the click of the bathroom lock, a sound that haunted me through so many nights. But today, I didn't feel pain. I felt light and grateful, because without those 2 locked days, I wouldn't have had these 2 peaceful years. Without the betrayal, I wouldn't have known freedom. On the windowsill, my orchid is blooming. The white petals, thin as paper, tremble in the early breeze. I set my hand on the frame and whispered, "Edward, do you see? I'm all right." I found myself again. I remembered when we were young, working all week for a simple dinner, but always with laughter. Edward used to say, "If one day I'm not here, live so you're not afraid of anything." I didn't fully understand that until now. I used to fear loneliness, loss, being left behind. But it turns out the scariest thing isn't losing others, it's losing yourself in submission. Now my days are simple and complete. Morning walks on the sand, a small lunch at noon, watering the orchid in the afternoon, reading by the window at night. I've started teaching the neighbor kids how to sew and how to plant. Some days they call me Grandma Lila, and it makes me laugh. I've never had a title that felt so easy. People here are used to the sight of an older woman with silver hair, a gentle smile, and a basket of fresh fish in her hand. No one knows my backstory, and I don't need them to. I've left the past behind not by forgetting, but by setting it down where it belongs. One afternoon I received a postcard without a return address. The handwriting was familiar, a little shaky. It was Cole's. "Mom, I'm sorry. Everything's changed. I understand now." I looked at it for a long time, then tucked it into my journal between 2 blank pages. I didn't cry. I just smiled. Forgiveness isn't opening the door for someone to come back, it's closing the door that once wounded you. That night, I took another long shower. Warm water ran over my shoulders, down to the floor, fogging the mirror. I looked at my reflection, older, more lines, but calmer and more at ease than ever. I murmured, "This old lady finally did it." Outside, the waves kept breaking. I opened the door and let the breeze carry the sound inside. Moonlight fell across my shoulders, soft as an old blanket. In that moment, I knew I was truly free. No big house needed, no recognition, no thunderous revenge, just peace. Just the knowledge that the woman once locked in a bathroom has now unlocked her own life. I wrote the final line in my journal before closing it. Life can take many things from us, but if we still dare to choose ourselves, then we haven't lost anything. Then I set down the pen and blew out the candle, letting the night close softly like a finished chapter. Dawn rose again offshore. I stepped onto the porch, closed my eyes, and let the sea breeze brush my cheeks. Each wrinkle felt like it smiled with the morning light. I knew that from here on, every day is a gift of courage, of freedom, and of myself. And if someone is listening to this story, maybe a mother, a grandmother, or someone who's been hurt, I only want to say this: don't be afraid to leave if staying means losing yourself. Don't be afraid to start over, even late. Dawn always waits, as long as you're brave enough to open the door and step out. I'm grateful you've walked with me to the very end of this journey, every second, every feeling, every breath of this story. If you're listening from a faraway city, maybe New York, Seattle, Houston, or Miami, please leave a hello in the comments. I want to know where you're listening from and what made you stay to the very end. If my story touched you, please like, subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications for new journeys from women like me, women who once fell but never gave in. because with your listening, my story truly lives. After 7 years of living off the very house I bought, my son and daughter-in-law suddenly won $85 million. But instead of being grateful for the shelter I gave them, by noon that very day my daughter-in-law had cruelly thrown all my belongings out the window, china shattering across the street while she screamed, "We don't need to do charity for you anymore. Go die old in a nursing home." I stood in the yard, clothes dusty and rumpled, my heartbeat steady, and quietly said, "Did you read the name on the back of the ticket?" Her victorious smile froze for a split second, and soon that single question would make her glittering world collapse for good. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I'm Lorraine Whitmore, 63, a widow for nearly a decade. Since Arthur passed, the two-story house in the suburbs of Savannah, Georgia, became my only refuge, and then my son Mason's as well, along with his beautiful but overly sharp wife, Brielle. 7 years ago, when Mason lost his job and Brielle was pregnant, they knocked on my door in a fall storm, soaked and shivering. I opened the door, didn't ask much, and just said, "Come in, this house always has room for you." From then on, we lived together 3 generations, seemingly peaceful until that fateful morning. That morning, I got up early as usual to make coffee and pancakes for the little ones, Ava, 8, and Micah, 5. But instead of the small footsteps chattering down the stairs, I heard a scream rip through the house from downstairs. "Mason, get up now!" Brielle's shrill voice rang out, bursting with excitement. I set the coffee pot down, heart pounding. I was used to my daughter-in-law's temper, but today there was something different: excitement, panic, almost mania. The wooden stairs shook as Mason ran down. I stayed at the top landing, holding my breath. A minute of silence. Then suddenly, shouts exploded. "No way. Oh my God, no way. We won, Mason. $85 million. $85 million. I looked down and saw Brielle clutching the lottery ticket, trembling with excitement. Mason hugged her, laughing and repeating, "I can't believe it. I can't believe it." They both jumped up and down, tears streaming over young, hungry faces. And I, the one who bought that very ticket yesterday, with the numbers I've used for 20 years, each one a family birthday, stood frozen. My heart sank, not because of the money, but because they never asked, "Mom, is this your ticket?" I stepped halfway down the stairs, about to speak, when Brielle turned, eyes blazing like someone who'd just found buried treasure. "We're rich, Mason. Finally, we don't have to live in this old house anymore." She said it and kissed the ticket like a trophy. I stopped. The words, "this old house," stabbed right through me. The home Arthur and I built with every saved dollar, every extra shift, every can of paint we rolled on with our own hands. I wanted to say I was the one who bought that ticket at the corner convenience store, but the words stuck in my throat. I looked at Mason, my only son, hoping he'd realize something. But he just stood there, letting Brielle call the shots, like always. I went back to my small room in the attic, heavy-hearted. I brewed tea, but my hands shook so hard I spilled water on the table. For the first time in years, I felt like a stranger in my own home. About an hour later, I heard cars pulling up, nosy neighbors arriving after hearing about the lottery family. Laughter, doors slamming, glasses clinking. I looked out the window and saw Brielle showing off, waving the ticket, and Mason beside her, smiling awkwardly. By noon, there was a hard knock on my door. Brielle stood there, arms crossed, lips curled. "Start packing. We're moving, and we don't need any dead weight coming along." I didn't grasp it at first. "Dead weight?" I repeated, my voice hoarse. "Yeah, we're buying a mansion. It wouldn't make sense for you to come. At your age, it's better to find a decent nursing home. They'll take care of you there." I looked her in the eye. "This is my house, Brielle. Used to be, Lorraine," she said, emphasizing each word. Now we have a new life. And you're not part of it." Then she yanked open the closet and started throwing my things, dresses, the wedding photo, a pottery vase I made when I was young. Everything went crashing into the yard below. I stood there, silent, while neighbors gathered and whispered. Mason stood on the threshold, hands in his pockets, face pale, but he didn't step in to stop his wife. "Brielle, stop!" he muttered, but she didn't listen. "We don't need to do charity for you anymore," she shouted, as if she wanted the whole neighborhood to hear. The words felt like a knife in my chest. I quietly bent down, picked up the shattered frame, and wiped the dust off with my sleeve. The elderly neighbor across the street hurried over to help me gather things, but I stopped her. "Thank you, but I can do it." I collected what was still intact, a few changes of clothes, a wedding photo, and a small box holding Arthur's ring. When a beat-up yellow cab pulled up, I stood, took a long breath. I turned to Mason, my son, whom I'd once believed would protect his mother for life. "You're not going to say anything?" I asked, calm and firm. He looked down. "Brielle, just went a little too far, Mom." "No, Mason," I said. "This is the choice you two made." I walked toward the gate, then stopped. Brielle stood there, arms crossed, still wearing that triumphant smile. I looked straight at her. "Did you read the name on the back of the ticket?" For a split second, that smile stalled. A flicker of doubt crossed her eyes, then she quickly feigned disdain. "I have no idea what you're talking about." I didn't answer. I opened the cab door, put my suitcase in the trunk, and told the driver softly, "Anywhere, with the cheapest rooms nearby." As the car pulled away, I checked the rearview mirror. Mason stood frozen on the steps, the two little ones pressed to the upstairs window, eyes red-rimmed. Brielle turned away, pretending to be on the phone, but I could see her shoulders tighten. The room I rented sat above a Chinese restaurant. It barely fit a twin bed, a wobbly wooden table, and a window stuck in its frame. The smell of frying oil rose from downstairs, seeping into my hair and clothes. I sat on the edge of the bed, opened my bag, and took out a paper folded in quarters, the purchase receipt. The scrawled Lorraine Whitmore in the signature box was still clear. I ran my finger over the name and heard Arthur's voice in my ear. "Always sign your name, Lorraine. People can forget everything else, but a signature never lies." I smiled faintly. Outside, the city buzzed, but in that tiny room I felt a strange peace. They thought I'd lost, but really, the game had only just begun. After Arthur was laid to rest, the house was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking all night. I missed him, his tall, slender frame, the way he grumbled when I added extra salt to the stew, and that raspy laugh every early morning. Widowhood at 56 taught me to speak less and keep small rituals to feel like he was still around, pouring 2 cups of coffee each morning, straightening the armchair by the fireplace, sometimes whispering, "I'm okay, Arthur." Then, one February night in a downpour, Mason showed up. He stood on the porch, soaked, gripping a suitcase. Behind him was Brielle, makeup smeared, eyes red. "Mom, we lost the apartment. My company folded. The landlord wants rent now. We can't swing it." I opened the door without further questions and nodded. "Come in, this house always has room for you." Brielle thanked me, voice trembling. She was young, beautiful, and knew how to draw. Sympathy. That day I believed I was doing the right thing. I couldn't have imagined that Mason's just a few months would stretch into 7 years, 7 years of being the help in the very house with my name on the deed. At first, things seemed fine. I gave them the big downstairs room, the one Arthur loved for its east-facing windows. "Morning sun is good for the baby," I said. Mason squeezed my hand and smiled. "Thanks, Mom. I'll pay you back soon." But soon never came. After Ava was born, then Micah 2 years later, Brielle didn't return to work. Mason bounced between jobs, some months bringing home nothing. I covered every utility bill, groceries, and the homeowner's insurance with my teacher's pension and what little savings of Arthur's remained. I didn't regret it. I believed family love balances itself, that when they got stable, they'd lift me up in return. I remembered Arthur's words before he died. "If you can, don't let our kid know hunger, Lorraine." So I did everything to keep the house warm. Mornings I woke at 5 a.m., made breakfast for everyone, packed Mason's lunch, and took Ava to preschool. Afternoons I did laundry, cooked dinner, and rocked Micah to sleep. Everything ran like a clock I wound with my own hands. Then one day Brielle said, "Mom, I need a quiet place to work. My old company's letting me do consulting from home. Maybe you could move up to the attic. I'll turn your room into a home office." I hesitated. The attic was a storage space, low-ceilinged and sweltering in summer. But she said it in that syrupy tone. "It's more private up there. You can rest without the kids making noise." I forced a smile. "If it's convenient for you, do it." I didn't know that decision pushed me to the top floor of my own house and pushed me out of the role of mother in my family. From then on, I officially became Miss Lorraine upstairs. Brielle reorganized the kitchen and labeled everything top shelf for the kids, bottom shelf for Mason's snacks. That cabinet is where you can keep your tea. I didn't object, but I felt like a boarder. That winter, she started hosting adults-only dinners. I still cooked and set the table, but when dinner began, Brielle would smile and say, "Mom, I saved you a plate in the kitchen. We need to discuss work." I stepped out, closed the kitchen door, and ate alone under the yellow light. From the living room came laughter, clinking glasses, and Brielle talking like the lady of the house. I kept telling myself, "It's fine, they're young, they have their own lives. I just need to stay quiet." But silence, when long enough, becomes shackles. When Ava started talking, Brielle taught her to call me Miss Lorraine instead of Grandma. "Grandma sounds odd in the mouth, Mom," she said. "Miss Lorraine is younger and more polite." I laughed it off, but that night I cried in the bathroom. The next day I still made my granddaughter's milk as if nothing had happened. In the third year, Mason switched to part-time engineering. I asked about his pay. He avoided my eyes. "Enough to get by, Mom." I knew it wasn't true, but didn't press. When your child looks down out of shame, a mother often chooses to pretend not to see. I kept paying for electricity, water, health insurance, and sometimes slipped in extra for Ava's tuition. I told myself I could shoulder it, as long as they stayed afloat. By the fourth year, Brielle began setting rules. "Mom, no sweets for the kids at night." "Mom, the house needs to be spotless, guests are coming." "Mom, towels should be folded this way, not the old way." Each thing sounded small, but together they nicked like 1,000 paper cuts. I listened. I did. I swallowed it. Once, I made Arthur's favorite stew. The smell filled the kitchen. Mason breathed in deeply. "Man, it's been a while." Brielle frowned. "Red meat is full of cholesterol, Mason. You don't want to die young like your dad, do you?" The table fell silent. I looked down at my plate and murmured, "Your dad ate this up to 85 and was still healthy." She smirked. "Different times, Mom." After that dinner, I understood. In this house, I was no longer allowed to cook from memory. Mason wasn't heartless, just weak. When I said Brielle was going too far, he sighed. "She's under a lot of pressure, Mom. I'm gone all day, and she's home with 2 kids. And I'm taking care of the whole house." I wanted to say, but didn't. Sometimes I overheard Brielle on the phone with friends. "I'm living with my mother-in-law. It's so hard, she interferes in everything." Each time I wondered who she was talking about, because I hardly meddled in anything anymore. I just quietly cleaned, did laundry, and recorded expenses in a small notebook. I still remember a spring morning. I was hanging laundry in the backyard when I heard Brielle in the kitchen telling Mason, "Do you know how people see us? a married couple living off his old mother. I want a place of our own. But Mom pays the homeowner's insurance here. Selling's not that simple. Then have her sign the transfer. She doesn't need a big house anyway. I stood behind the curtain, heart pounding, not from fear, but because I realized I'd given them too much. Piece by piece, until they believed everything they had was theirs by right. That summer I started journaling. Every night I opened an old leather notebook. The first line was always the same. Day of patience. I didn't write much more, just small notes. Brielle nagged about towels. Mason forgot to pick up Ava. Micah was sick. I stayed up all night. Tiny, crooked lines like the trace of someone fading from her own life. Even so, one thing in me never went out: tenderness. I loved Mason, the boy who used to carry me. Piggyback when my back hurt. I loved the two little ones, who laughed every time I baked cookies. I even loved Brielle, though she hurt me. Maybe because I believed people can change, that one day they'd understand I did everything out of love, but patience has limits. And what broke it wasn't a big fight, just a small thing so small that if I told it, people might think I was overreacting. Yet I remember that afternoon perfectly, sunlight slanting through the window, when Brielle said one sentence that completely shattered my endurance. Ava's 10th birthday came on a bright April day, the yard filled with azalea scent. I still remember her eyes when she pointed to the sign in the sporting goods store, a turquoise bicycle with a white wicker basket and shimmering streamers trailing in the wind. "Grandma, if I had that bike, I'd never be late for school again." She beamed. I smiled too, with a knot in my chest. I knew the price of that bike, $200, almost all of what was left of my pension after paying that month's bills. I hesitated many times, then still decided to buy it. I saved every spare coin, cut my spending for weeks, even gave up my favorite almond milk. She's only 10 once, I told myself. And sometimes one gift can make a childhood feel complete. 3 days before Ava's birthday, I quietly walked to the shop in town. The clerk, a curly-haired kid, helped me pick the exact turquoise bike she loved. I asked for silver wrapping paper with sunflowers printed on it, tied with a white bow. When the paper caught the sunlight, I smiled, picturing my granddaughter's shining face. I hid the bike in the garage and threw an old cloth over it. I couldn't sleep all night, replaying the moment Ava would see it. Arthur would have smiled if he were still here. He used to say, "Sometimes the smallest gift becomes the biggest memory." I wanted to give her a memory like that. On the morning of her birthday, I got up, earlier than usual. I made heart-shaped pancakes topped with strawberries and whipped cream. The kitchen smelled wonderful. I hung a few balloons by the window and set a vase of white roses in the center of the table. The house rarely felt that cheerful. I put on the old blue dress Arthur once complimented and felt a few years younger. Ava ran down the stairs, blonde pigtails bouncing, clapping and singing. "It's my birthday! Grandma, you remembered!" I opened my arms and hugged her. "Of course, sweetheart, I have a surprise for you." I hadn't finished the sentence when Brielle walked in wrinkled pajamas, hair pinned high. She looked around, frowning at the balloons and strawberries. "Mom, what is all this?" I said we didn't need to make a big deal. "It's just breakfast for Ava. It didn't cost much," I answered gently. She opened the fridge, poured a glass of orange juice, then turned back, voice syrupy. "You know, Mason and I already agreed this year we want to teach her about saving. No expensive gifts. We want her to understand the value of money." I looked at Ava and saw her smile dim. I tried to stay calm. "Don't worry, I only got a small present, nothing extravagant." Brielle raised an eyebrow. "Small, huh?" I smiled. "You'll see tonight." She stayed quiet, but her eyes were wary. I knew Brielle didn't like me doing anything that might make her look less in front of the kids. With her, everything I did had an angle. That afternoon, when Mason brought the kids home from school, I took out the garage key. "Ava, come here with Grandma," I called. She ran over, eyes lighting up as I pulled back the cloth to reveal the shimmering turquoise bike. "Oh my gosh, it's beautiful!" Ava gasped, almost breathless. "Is it really mine, Grandma?" I nodded. "Happy birthday, my little angel." She threw her arms around me, laughing and crying at the same time. My heart melted with happiness. But the moment lasted only seconds. Brielle's voice cut in behind us, cold as steel. "What is this?" She came closer, eyes raking over the bike, then stared straight at me. "I told you, Mom, no expensive gifts." I stayed calm. "It's just a bike, Brielle. She's dreamed about it all year." "That's not the point. The point is you're breaking our parenting rules." "Rules?" I repeated, with a small smile. "I don't recall love having rules." She stepped in, voice low and sharp as a blade. "You did this just to show the kids you're better than me, didn't you?" "Brielle, don't be ridiculous," Mason chimed in, but his voice was weak. I looked at her. "I did it because I love my granddaughter, that's all." Ava gripped my hand, frightened by her parents arguing. "Mom, please, I'll clean the bike myself. I won't ask for any more presents," she sobbed. But Brielle just sighed, then crouched to Ava's eye level. "Sweetie, we just want you to learn to appreciate things. This bike isn't right. Grandma will return it, and then you'll understand why grown-ups have to save." "No!" Ava burst into tears. I held her, feeling her little heart thudding against my chest. "That's enough, Brielle," I said, my voice tight. "If you want to teach a lesson, use your own money, not her joy." She only pressed her lips together and pulled out her phone. "Mom, return the bike, or I will. I'm not joking." That afternoon, I walked the bike back to the store, each step heavy as stone. The wind rustled through the trees, making the white bow flutter and whisper like Ava's laughter that morning. I took one last look before stepping inside and drew a deep breath. "I'd like to return this bike," I told the curly-haired clerk. "Are you sure, ma'am?" "It's our last one." "Yes." The little girl changed her mind. When I signed the refund slip, my hand shook so much the ink smeared. I folded the receipt and tucked it into my wallet. As I left, a light rain started. Cold drops hit my cheeks, mixing with the salty taste at the corner of my mouth. That night, the house was quiet. No cake, no candles, just the TV murmuring in the living room. I set out the small cake. I'd already bought a simple vanilla butter cake on the kitchen table and placed the card I'd written, "Happy birthday, Ava, love you always. Grandma." Then I lit a tiny candle and watched it burn down, the flicker reflecting on Arthur's photo on the wall. "Do you see this?" I whispered. "Our granddaughter isn't allowed to receive a bicycle because of a lesson on saving. I don't have enough say in my own house anymore." I stood, put on my coat, and stepped outside. The April night was colder than I expected. The corner store cast a dim yellow glow, the one where I usually bought milk. I had no plan, just knew I needed air. The shop was nearly empty. The owner, a familiar Italian gentleman, smiled. "Cold night, Miss Lorraine. Still want coffee?" I shook my head, then my eyes stopped at the lottery counter next to the register. A small sign read, "Jackpot tomorrow night, $85 million. I gave a tired, wry smile. "One ticket, please, with these numbers." I slowly read the familiar sequence: 10, 14, 21, 25, 30, 41, 47. Birthdays for Arthur, me, Mason, and the two kids. The numbers I'd played for 20 years, an old habit that never meant much. I pulled out a pen and signed the back. "Lorraine Whitmore, Arthur's old rule, always sign and keep the receipt, Lorraine." People can argue plenty, but they can't fake a signature. I smiled at the owner, slid the ticket and receipt into my coat pocket. "I could use a little luck tonight," he replied. "Hope you get what you're wishing for." On the way home, I looked at the lit windows in the dark and wondered how many People inside were as tired as I was, still trying to believe in good, even when hurt by their own family. I wasn't hoping for wealth. I was asking for one simple thing: a way out. When I got home, I placed the ticket and receipt on the kitchen table, right where anyone could see, as if laying down a quiet prayer to the universe. Then I went up to the attic and listened to the rain tapping on the roof. The next morning, as the first light slipped through the window, I heard Brielle shriek downstairs, her voice high with excitement. "Mason, wake up, now! We won!" Rushed footsteps, then a burst of laughter, quick kisses, a chair scraping. 85 million! Oh my God, we won 85 million! I sat up, heart pounding. I didn't need to look to know which ticket they were holding. I stepped onto the stairs and looked down at a scene both familiar and strange. Brielle clinging to Mason, tears of joy, the ticket held high, the ticket I had bought. "I can't believe it. Who'd have thought? Just picked it up off the table and our lives changed," Brielle yelled, buzzing with excitement. "Maybe someone forgot it, but it's ours now," Mason laughed, hugging her tight. I stood still on the staircase. What started with a returned bicycle was turning into a storm I'd never imagined. I said nothing. I just watched the two people I'd supported for 7 years dancing around my kitchen as if fate had handed them a reward. I closed my eyes and told myself, "Stay quiet, Lorraine. Let them think they've won." I wanted to see how far their greed would take them and whether on that road they'd have enough conscience to realize the ticket was never theirs. 3 days after they won, the phone in my rented room rang off the hook at 7 a.m. I didn't pick up in time before it rang again, urgent, as if someone were racing the clock. "This is Grant Holloway, counsel for the Georgia State Lottery Commission," a calm baritone said. You need to verify a few details about the lottery ticket registered to Lorraine Whitmore." "Is now a good time?" I paused, heart quickening. "Yes, I'm the one who bought that ticket." Papers rustled on his end. "We've matched the signature, serial number, and our system records. The ticket was registered under the name Lorraine Whitmore, former Savannah address, correct?" "Correct. Then congratulations, you're the grand prize winner. $85 million. I was quiet for a few seconds. Not because I was surprised, but because a strange feeling rose in me, not exactly joy, not shock, more like when a storm you saw from miles away finally arrives. "Mr. Holloway continued, his tone turning serious, "But I need you to be aware third parties have contacted the commission claiming to be the real owner of the ticket. A woman named Brielle Carter Whitmore." I closed my eyes and smiled. "I'm guessing she didn't forget the hyphenated last name?" "Not at all," he said, a bit surprised at my composure. "She claims the ticket was bought with marital funds and that you, pardon my bluntness, are no longer competent to manage assets." I let out a small laugh, steady. "They haven't changed. When they can't take something, they try to convince others I'm not smart enough to keep it." I heard typing on his end. "Could you confirm a few items so we can protect your legal rights? The back signature, your ID number, and proof of purchase time?" I opened my wallet and pulled out the receipt I'd sealed between 2 laminates. "I have the receipt. Benny's Corner Mart. Purchase time, 7:43 p.m., Friday, April 12th. The serial number matches the ticket. I also have copies of my ID, and the store camera will show it." I spoke clearly, without a hint of hesitation. On the other end, Holloway's voice dropped, impressed. "Excellent. That's sufficient to affirm you as the lawful owner. However, I should warn you, these folks seem ready to cause trouble. They may push rumors that you're confused or even forge medical records." I sighed, but didn't waver. "Don't worry. I'm used to their labeling games. In my life, I've had many tags: weak, stubborn, old-fashioned. One more won't matter." A beat of silence, then he said slowly, "You're the calmest person I've ever told they've won $85 million. I gave a small smile. "Because to me, the real prize isn't the money, it's the truth." Before ending the call, he reminded me, The claim window is 10 days from today. If you need it, we can arrange security or independent financial advisors." I thanked him, then said, "I'll make arrangements. But give me a few days, I want to see how far their performance goes." After the call, I sat still for a long time. Morning light slipped through the small window and washed over the peeling gray wall. I felt caught between two worlds. On one side, the shabby room that smelled like fryer oil. On the other, the people who'd just declared themselves millionaires with my money. I pulled out my old notebook and wrote a few lines. Day 1 after the win. I'm still poor, but richer than they are in one way. I still have my self-respect. I closed the notebook and dialed Penelope Banks, my neighbor of 30 years. Penelope's the kind of woman everyone respects. Serious, fair, and allergic to show-offs. "Lorraine, good Lord, where are you? The whole neighborhood's talking about your lottery win." "I knocked a few times and only saw your daughter-in-law," she said. "You went on vacation?" I laughed. "Yeah, I'm on vacation somewhere with no air conditioning, no people, and a smell of grease in my hair." "What on earth?" "Pen, I need a favor." I kept it short. "Watch the house for a few days. Note dates, plates, what cars show up. I want to see how fast they burn through cash." Penelope. I was quiet a few seconds, then asked softly, "What are you going to do, Lorraine?" "I'm not going to do anything," I said lightly. "I just want the truth to surface at the right time, in the right place." In the afternoon, I stopped by First Southern Bank and opened a small safe deposit box. The young teller asked, "What will you be storing, ma'am?" "My future," I said, placing inside the original receipt, a photocopy of the ticket, and copies of my ID. I kept scans and a few photos on my phone. I've learned that sometimes justice needs to be kept in more than one drawer. As I left the bank, I caught my reflection in the glass, an older woman with silver hair, a gray cardigan, and an oddly steady gaze. Arthur used to tell me, "You're gentle, but when pushed, you turn into ice." Today, I understood he was right. I walked back and stopped at a sidewalk cafe. It was small, with just a few people reading the paper. I ordered a hot black coffee, pulled out my notebook, and began to write. Saturday, 10 They still think I'm weak. They don't know the ticket has already spoken for me. I'm not running, I'm preparing. Every lie is a trap, and all I have to do is wait for the snap. That evening, when the city lights came on, I got the first text from Mason. "Mom, we want to talk." "Brielle is stressed, don't believe what the papers are saying." "The papers?" I opened my phone, and sure enough, a local site had posted, "Savannah couple wins jackpot. Elderly mother gifts ticket to her son, then disappears." I laughed out loud. Even their lies were clumsy. I murmured, "Congratulations, Brielle. You just publicly admitted I bought the ticket." I texted Mason back, "Don't worry, I'm not missing. I'm just seeing clearly who's genuine and who isn't." Then I turned off my phone and lay back on the bed. Rain ticked against the window. I didn't know where they were, maybe touring mansions, maybe ordering a new car, maybe planning a new millionaire party, but I knew one thing, the rules had changed. From the moment the signature Lorraine Whitmore appeared on the back of the ticket, they could lie, they could threaten, but they couldn't erase the truth. I put my hand on the notebook and wrote one last line before turning out the light. Tomorrow, when they buy more cars, more dresses, more lies, I'll just smile. Because this game isn't about money. It's about character. I used to think greed only shows when people are desperate. Turns out, it grows even bigger when they get something they never deserved. Just 3 days after the win, Brielle started performing like a star. She made a new social media account called The Lucky Whitmore. On flashy live streams, she wore an ivory silk dress, held a glass of wine, and smiled sweet as sugar. "Life can be very fair," she told thousands of viewers. "If you do the right thing, the universe will send a reward." I watched that video on my old phone in the rented room, half amused and half heartsick. Because in that line about the universe rewarding people who do the right thing, Brielle was implying I was the opposite, an old, senile freeloader living off her kids. On her live stream, she said, "My mother-in-law once promised to gift the ticket to the family, and we didn't want to accept it, but she insisted." Every line was crafted to sound grateful while planting doubt. I read the comments below. "So lucky to have such a generous mother-in-law. She must really love her daughter-in-law." And one that stung my eyes. "Hope the old lady doesn't try to take back what she gave." They didn't know. They hadn't seen Brielle's real face. But they would. That morning, Penelope called. "Lorraine, you won't believe it. The whole neighborhood is buzzing about your house. Furniture trucks, flower deliveries, even a brand new SUV parked right out front. The dealer's sticker's still on." I chuckled. "I believe it, Pen. I even know the color black with a silver sheen. Sporty model, right?" She burst out laughing. "Exactly. You're psychic. No need to guess, Pen. With Brielle, the bigger the better, as long as someone is watching." At noon, Penelope sent photos. Brielle posing at the front door, holding a bouquet of white roses, next to a sign that read, "The Whitmore Residence." Mason forced a smile beside her, while the two kids were dressed in matching white outfits more like ad models than children. White roses. Arthur used to say, "Nothing is emptier than a white rose beautiful, but no scent." I've never heard a truer line. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was Brielle. Her voice was candy sweet, nothing like the tone of someone who'd thrown me out of my own house. "Miss Lorraine, I just want a gentle chat." "We're family, right?" I stayed silent. "About the ticket," she went on. "There's probably a small mix-up. I just need you to sign a brief confirmation that it isn't yours. It's only to help the bank process things faster." I gave a small laugh. "Brielle, when did you read the name on the back of the ticket?" Lorraine's question may sound gentle, but it's stronger than any revenge. If you've ever been misunderstood or looked down on like she was, would you stay silent or speak up like that? Share how you feel below. Sometimes one honest comment is enough to give strength to someone going through the same thing. Dead silence on the other end. The pause stretched so long I could hear her breathing quicken. Then she changed the subject. "People online are saying you're not in a stable situation. I'm just worried someone might take advantage of you." I cut in. "Thanks for the concern. But the only person who's ever taken advantage of me is the one on this call." I hung up, and when I looked out the window, rain began to fall, each drop tapping the foggy glass like a signal that a storm was coming. The next night, an email came from Attorney Holloway. "Miss Lorraine, we just received a letter from the law office of Carter Whitmore Family Holdings. It alleges you lack the financial and mental capacity to manage assets and requests that financial guardianship be transferred to your son, Mason Whitmore." I wasn't surprised. I knew Brielle would play this card, attacking with the senile mother image she'd seeded in public. "Still," I asked, "what do you think, Holloway?" He gave a short, wry laugh. "I think it's a bad play. They don't understand the law. Your signature, the original receipt, the purchase data, they're all solid. If they push this, they'll cause trouble for themselves." "Then let them keep going," I said. "The farther they walk, the more footprints they leave." The next day, Penelope called again, voice lowered to a near whisper. "Lorraine, I've heard them arguing all afternoon." Mason yelled, "Stop it, this is my mother!" And Brielle screamed, "No way! If you don't take my side, you lose everything!" I closed my eyes. Mason's image flashed in my mind, the little boy who once pedaled his bike around the yard, who promised, "I'll protect you forever, Mom." Now he was stuck between his mother and a wife draining his soul. I didn't blame him. I was just sad. Sometimes love can make people blind. I lit a small candle and placed it by Arthur's photo on the table. The light washed over his gentle, steady face, just like before. "Do you see this, Arthur?" I whispered. "I did what you asked. I'm not bowing my head anymore. I'll stand tall, even if I'm standing alone. I sat a long time watching the flame tremble. Every time a draft slipped through the doorframe, the flame wavered but didn't go out. In it, I saw myself maybe shaky, but still shining. I opened my notebook and wrote a new page. Already spent it, Mom. Deposits on 2 cars, down payment on a mansion on Tybee Island, signed a furniture contract, even paid for a Europe trip. All from a pending funds account. They said the money would arrive soon. I sat on the old plastic chair and listened, each word cutting like a blade. So, I asked quietly, you spent money you didn't have? Mason was silent. I thought he'd make excuses, but he didn't. Just a sigh and a faint rustle, like he was raking his hand through his hair. I closed my eyes. Mason, for 7 years, who paid the electric bill, the water, the insurance, the kids' schooling. No answer, I repeated, slower. Who, Mason? After a heavy few seconds, he said softly, you did. Right, I said. Me. The person you said was living off you. The one thrown out of her own house. The one labeled, not competent. And now you're calling to ask if the ticket is mine. Mason's voice shook. I didn't know Brielle would do that. She said, she thought you wouldn't take it back. I gave a small, bitter laugh. She doesn't understand me, Mason. I can forgive being poor. I can't forgive deception. I paused, then said slowly, you want to talk? Fine. Come to where I am. Today, 2 p.m. Mason was quiet. I heard an engine start on his end. Mom, I'll come. Good, I said, but bring the truth. No gifts, no excuses. Just the truth. After the call, I looked around my little room, not fancy, not tidy, but the only place still mine. The peeling wooden table, the old beige curtain, the slightly crooked plastic chair where I wrote every night. I wiped the dust off the chair, steadied its legs, then opened the window to let in the morning air with its mix of fryer oil and coffee from the restaurant downstairs. That smell used to bother me, but today it made me feel alive, like I'd stepped back into a real rhythm of living, no longer faking niceness to keep anyone happy. Before the meeting time, the phone rang again. It was Attorney Halloway. Miss Whitmore, he said, I've secured an identity verification and prize claim slot for you. 3 p.m. tomorrow at the main office. Please arrive 15 minutes early. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Thank you, Grant. This is almost over. Do you want us to alert the press? In cases like yours, the media is very interested, I answered. Not yet. I want a few people to know the truth before the world does. After the call, I brewed a pot of peppermint tea. The fresh scent filled the room, blending with the soft noon light. I sat at the table, opened my notebook, and wrote one more line. Monday, 6:45. My son asked, Did you buy the ticket? I answered, Yes. Maybe this morning, for the first time in 7 years, he heard his mother's real voice. I closed the notebook and set it beside the cup. On the wall, an old family photo hung slightly crooked. In it, me, Arthur, and 5-year-old Mason stood in front of the first house we bought. Sunlight lit our faces bright and peaceful. I touched the faded frame. Arthur, I whispered, if you were here, what would you do? Would you forgive him? I answered myself in silence. Maybe you would. I won't. I poured more water into the pot, and the steam fogged the window. Each bead on the glass reflected a memory. Mason's first day of school and the lunch I packed. Arthur laughing, saying the boy looked just like him. Then the funeral, the driving rain, and me standing alone as the casket was lowered. That day I promised to protect our son at all costs. But it turns out, sometimes protecting means letting him face his own mistakes. It wasn't even 2 o'clock yet, but I was ready. I set the table, arranged 2 cups of tea and a small plate of cookies. Nothing fancy, just my habit. Older folks like me tend to make things comfortable before serious conversations. I threw the window wide so the light would fall across the tablecloth and make the room feel less gloomy. Outside, traffic was picking up. I heard kids laughing on the street and an older lady greeting customers at the cafe across the way. Life went on as usual. While I was getting ready for the most important confrontation of my life, not in a courtroom, but with the son I brought into this world. I looked at the clock, 1:47. It wasn't time yet, but my heart was beating harder, not from fear but from keeping myself steady. I wanted Mason to see clearly. His mother is not the weak, confused woman Brielle painted me to be. I wanted every word I said to carry the weight of a truth they had tried to bury. A breeze moved through, carrying the scent of mint out to the porch. I sat down, placed my hand on my notebook, and told myself, if you choose conscience, I'll save you. If you choose silence, let the law do the rest. I turned the teacup slightly and watched the little circles ripple across the surface, each ring a symbol of 7 years of pressure, 7 years of endurance, 7 years of unconditional love. Now each ring was fading into the next, leaving the surface still like my heart before the storm. 1 more hour, and Mason would walk through that door. I told myself, this time, you won't only meet your mother. You'll meet the woman you and your wife woke up, the woman you should never have underestimated. I took the first sip of tea, the warmth sliding down my throat. Sunlight tilted across the old wall, leaving a soft band of light like a promise. Outside, a light breeze brushed the window frame, and the wind chime gave a gentle ring. I looked at the empty chair across from me and said out loud, "Son, I'm waiting." A knock sounded right at 2 p.m. Not early, not late. I stood, feeling not nervous but oddly as if I were about to preside over a hearing. The door opened. Mason stood there, pale, hair mussed, eyes sunken. He glanced around the shabby room, the stained ceiling, the lopsided single bed, the damp in the corner, then looked back at me, voice tight. "I'm sorry, Mom." Just 4 words. But I knew he'd crossed a long night to say them. I didn't answer, just motioned to the chair I'd wiped down that morning. "Sit, Mason. This room isn't pretty, but at least it's mine." He lowered his head, avoiding my eyes. The dim light through the window cast our silhouettes across the blotchy wall, 2 figures close, yet far. Not 5 minutes later, Brielle showed up. Her heels struck sharp on the concrete. A sweet, biting perfume swamped the lingering fryer smell from downstairs. She swept in, scanned the room, and smirked. "Cozy, isn't it?" I calmly set my cup down. "It's warm because there are no lies in here, Brielle." She shrugged, perched on the edge of the bed, and pulled out her phone like she was at some fancy meeting. Mason looked from her to me, awkward. I decided not to drag out the pretending. "I'll be brief," I said. "This morning, the lottery's attorney confirmed it. The name on the ticket is Lorraine Whitmore. The payout account is set. The money will hit within 24 hours. The room went still. Mason swallowed. After a few seconds, Brielle gave a thin laugh. "So you plan to keep it all?" I met her eyes. "I plan to keep what's mine." Mason lifted a hand. "Mom, I didn't come to fight. I just thought maybe we could make a deal. Like a family agreement so no one has to go to court." I smiled slightly, sorrow from 7 buried years behind it. "A deal? Mason, I've been making deals for 7 years. I dealt by staying silent when I was insulted. I dealt by paying the power bill when you were unemployed. I dealt by babysitting all day while your wife called me a freeloader. And the final deal, letting you throw my things out the window and saying nothing." Mason stared at his lap. Brielle sat straight, expression flat. She gave a light, scripted chuckle. "You misunderstand. I just think if we cooperate, everyone wins. We could buy a big house, you could live with us, have your own private suite, your own little kitchen, your own bath, every comfort." I lifted my head, voice cold as steel. "A private suite? In your estate?" "That's right," Brielle said quickly, thinking I'd softened. "Quiet, airy, private, just for you." I looked at her, letting my eyes settle on that fake smile. Sounds more like a dog kennel out back than a mother's room. She froze, color draining. Mason started to speak, but I raised a hand. Before we talk cooperation, I need answers, short ones. I opened a drawer and took out a folded paper, the expense log I'd kept for 7 years. I laid it on the table. First question, I said, eyes on Brielle. Who threw my things out the window that morning? She rolled her eyes. I just lost my temper a little. So you admit it, I cut in. Second question, who called me a freeloader, a useless hanger-on? She gave a bitter smile. What do you want an apology? I want the truth, and if you need a refresher, Mason was standing right there. He can confirm. Mason drew a breath, voice shaking. Mom, yes, Brielle said it. I heard everything. Brielle snapped toward him, eyes blazing. What are you doing? I'm telling the truth, Mason said, and for the first time in years, there was a little courage in his tone. The tiny room felt tight as a wire. Brielle's hands were clenched white. I went on, quiet but clear. Thank you, Mason. You finally said what you should have said 7 years ago. I unfolded the paper and read, careful, line by line. Electric bill, $118 a month, 7 years. Water, about $42. Roof repair in 2018, $1,400. Ava and Micah's school costs, a total of $18,600. Groceries, medicine, household goods, can't even count. I folded the paper and set it down, all from my pension. I'm not saying this to collect, I'm reminding you these numbers are evidence of kindness, not obligation. With no way to dodge, Brielle started to fray. You think you're a saint? You give and now you're keeping score? If you don't sign a transfer, I'll sue you for asset fraud. Mason flinched. Brielle, stop. But I was already on my feet, calmer than even I expected. I pointed to the door, still slightly open. You're free to leave, Brielle. No threats, no theater. The court isn't far, life will teach you for me. She shot up, eyes burning. You'll regret this. I cut in. No, you will. When you learn money can't buy 1 second of peace, when the kids start asking why grandma isn't home anymore, when your husband stops bowing his head, then you'll know who's truly pitiable. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Her face went from red to white. Then, without a word, she turned, heels hammering the floor, and the door slammed like a gavel. Silence again, just me and Mason. He bowed his head low. Mom, I don't know what to say. I let it go too far. I looked at my son, his face gaunt, but for the first time in years, his eyes held a little honesty. Just remember, I said, low but gentle, every mistake has a price. The only price I want from you is the truth. He nodded, eyes wet. Can you forgive me? I sighed softly. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, Mason. It's remembering and choosing not to take revenge. I stood and set a hand on his shoulder. Now go, take care of the kids. Tomorrow I'll claim the money. After that, we'll talk again. If you still want a mother. Mason squeezed my hand, then left. When the door clicked shut, the room fell, quiet. I sat and looked at the 2 teacups, one still warm, one gone cold. I knew the line between us was like those 2 cups. Once the same fragrance, no longer the same moment. I lit another candle and wrote in my notebook, this afternoon the rented room became a courtroom. No judge, no jury, just conscience. That evening, Mason came back. Brielle wasn't with him. It was just him, wrinkled shirt, eyes red from no sleep. I was in the same spot, the little wooden table with 2 cups of tea, as if time hadn't moved since the stormy afternoon. He stood at the door, unsure where to begin. I motioned for him to sit and said softly, You don't need to explain anymore, Mason. I understand. Now I want to talk about the future and the conditions for it to exist." He nodded, hands clenched until the knuckles went white. I poured tea and slid the cup toward him. "I will help you," I began, "but not for you, for Ava and Micah." He looked up, hope and shame mixed in his eyes. I spoke slowly, each word clear. "You put deposits on cars, a house, and silly luxuries I never needed. I can cover those, consider it protecting the kids from the financial chaos their parents created." Mason started to thank me, but I held up a hand. "Don't thank me yet. I said I'd help, not forgive. Every bit of help comes with conditions, and you need to understand forgiveness is not a get-out-of-jail-free card." I met his eyes, my voice dropping. "First condition. You end this toxic marriage. No half measures, no stalling. If you let Brielle drag you down, I'll pull all support. I won't bankroll anyone who chooses to live in the mud." Mason went still. I saw his shoulders tremble, but he didn't object. "Second condition," I continued, "you apologize publicly right on the front steps, in front of the neighbors who watched you let your wife humiliate me. Not to make me feel good, but to make you learn responsibility through action, not tears." I paused, took a sip, then said the last part the hardest for him. "Third condition. You go to counseling for single fathers. Not because I think you're weak, but because you need to relearn how to be a dad. Ava and Micah deserve a decent example, not a husband who stays silent when their mother is insulted." The air felt thick. Mason didn't speak for a full minute. Then he exhaled, voice small, as if afraid to wake someone. "What about Brielle?" I looked toward the window, the streetlights reflected on the glass, throwing a cold gold into the room. "She'll do what people like her always do, scream, blame, threaten, and I'll let her. But if she wants a fight, I'm ready." As if on cue, a hard, rapid knock hit the door. I didn't need to guess who it was. The door swung open and Brielle walked in, still beautiful but with clouded eyes. Arms folded, she let out a razor-edged laugh. "Perfect. Mommy and son plotting again?" Mason stood. "Brielle, I told you to stay home. At home so you can let her brainwash you?" She turned to me, a curled, contemptuous smile. "What are you doing teaching him conscience? Or is this emotional blackmail?" I stayed calm, letting none of her noise stir me. "I'm setting the terms for forgiveness, Brielle. And you, sadly, aren't on the list." "Oh, really?" She arched a brow, voice sharper. "You think you can control my husband forever? I'll take full custody and half the assets. I have legal rights and I know the law." I gave a small smile and answered evenly, no louder than conversation. "Then sue, Brielle. But remember, don't use my money to hire your lawyer." Silence stretched. In her eyes, I caught a flicker of confusion, maybe the first time she'd met someone who wasn't afraid. Mason turned, put a hand on my shoulder, and said, voice rough, "Mom, I choose you, and the kids." I didn't hug him or say more. I just nodded. Arthur's old words rang in my head. A man grows up when he faces consequences. Mason had stepped over that line, and I would let him walk it himself. Brielle looked at her husband, eyes rimmed red. "You'll regret this." Mason didn't answer. His silence was the reply she refused to accept. She yanked the door, the metal clanging against the wall. "I won't let this go! You'll lose everything!" Her voice cracked, split between hate and fear. I just watched her go and said, my voice low, "No, Brielle. You're the one who's losing because you've thrown away the one thing money can't buy. Respect," she snapped. "We'll see you in court. I'm not afraid." I smiled, light as a breeze. "Good, because this time, the court won't just ask who's right, it'll ask who forgot how to be human." Brielle spun on her heel. Her high heels hammered the metal stairs, echoing beat by beat like a countdown to an oncoming legal storm. I sat still and listened until the sound faded, leaving only silence. Mason collapsed into the chair, head in his hands. I don't even know where to start. Start by keeping your word, I said. Tomorrow, go apologize to Penelope and the neighbors who saw everything. Tell it all. No excuses. And from now on, you'll pay your own rent, your own tuition, every last bill. I can help, but I won't bankroll you anymore. He nodded. In those red-rimmed eyes, I saw a faint light, not the glow of someone forgiven, but of someone beginning to understand what starting over means. I stood and refilled his tea. Drink it, so you remember the taste of truth. Bitter at first, clean after. Mason took a small sip and gave a tiny nod. I understand, Mom. Softly, I answered, No, Mason, you're learning to understand. When he left, Savannah's night sank into a heavy mist. I stood at the window and watched his headlights disappear around the corner. On the table, my notebook lay open to a page half written. I picked up my pen and added, Tonight, my son chose what's right over what's easy. Forgiveness comes with terms because love isn't a servant. The clack of a liar's heels travels far, but in the end, silence wins. I set the pen down and blew out the candle. In the dark, only the streetlight framed the window and threw back my face tired, but at peace. Tomorrow, the legal fight would begin. But this time, I wouldn't be alone. The next afternoon, the sun finally broke through Savannah after days of gloom. Light glittered off rain-wet leaves like tinsel. I put on a beige cardigan and picked up my small bag. Inside were the folded lottery ticket, the receipt copy, and my ID, everything I'd prepared the night before. Attorney Grant Holloway arrived right on time. He opened the car door, as courteous as ever. Ready, Lorraine? I smiled. I've been ready for 7 years, Grant. Today I'm just reclaiming what's fair. We reached the Georgia Lottery office at 3:15 p.m. The headquarters stood in a sleek glass building, sky blue reflections running across it. As we walked through the entrance, the soft click of the automatic door sounded ordinary, but to me, it was a lock opening on a brand new chapter. Inside, a staffer led us to a verification room. A middle-aged woman in a gray suit came out to greet us, introducing herself as the Special Prize Records Manager. Are you the owner of the winning ticket number 78 amperes 4539? Yes, I said, taking the ticket from its plastic sleeve and laying it gently on the table. Gloved, she inspected it under a special light, matched the signature and serial number, then pulled up security footage from Benny's Corner Mart, the store where I'd bought the ticket on Ava's birthday. The screen showed a silver-haired woman in a brown coat signing the back of the ticket. No zoom needed, I knew it was me. Holloway nodded at me. The staffer said, The signature is a complete match. The ticket is valid. We'll seal and process the payout today. I exhaled, not in relief, but release. After verification, they presented payout options. I studied the list and said clearly, I'd like an initial portion now, enough to cover immediate needs. The remainder goes into a trust named the Arthur and Lorraine Whitmore Trust. The staffer looked a bit surprised. You want to set up a trust right now? Yes. I lost an honest husband and gave my life to our family. This trust is how I keep the cleanest part of that life intact. Holloway smiled. I'll finalize the trust paperwork today. It'll be a private trust, no public names, no media access. I nodded. Exactly. I've had enough noise. I want quiet, not spotlights. When everything was done, Holloway set the packet on the table. Do you want me to submit Miss Penelope Banks's statement as well? I've got her handwritten account detailing how Brielle and Mason started spending before any funds actually arrived. I gave a small smile. Yes. Not just for me, but for the truth. I want the record to show that kindness isn't stupidity. Holloway filed the full-set statement, receipts, video proof, and bank confirmations. The manager reviewed, signed, and sealed. Congratulations, Miss Whitmore, she said warmly. One last step. The first transfer will be made within 48 hours. The trust will go active upon approval. I held the receipt and read the printed line, Recipient, Lorraine Whitmore. One sheet, 12 letters, but proof of honor for a woman once called a freeloader. On the drive back, Holloway asked, "Any plans for the first disbursement?" "I want to open a separate education trust for the kids, Ava and Micah." "Good," he said. "I can help you set binding terms." "I only have one requirement," I said. "They can access it at 18 with proof of schooling. No one Mason included withdraws early. No adult touches. That money, not even me." Holloway studied me for a moment, then nodded. "You know, Lorraine, very few big winners think that far ahead. Most only think about spending." I smiled. "I've lived long enough to know money only matters when it stays where it should." That evening, I signed a lease for a small house near Seabrook Bay. It was quiet, with a front porch facing the water and a little garden. I put down a deposit to redo the kitchen and asked for a trellis of climbing roses, the kind Arthur once tended at the old place. The contractor asked, "What color?" "Velvety red, summer bloomers with a strong scent," I said. "I want to open the door each morning and remember him not with tears, but with fragrance." I paid, then left the rental office. Driving past the bay, the water caught the orange of the setting Sunday. For a moment I saw myself a woman once thrown out of her home walking down the road of her own freedom. Night fell. I went back to the old room to finish packing. My phone pinged an email from Brielle. Subject: Legal notice and health warning. I opened it. A long paragraph and an attachment, a medical report forged in my name, claiming I had significant memory impairment and lacked the capacity to manage finances. She still didn't understand the game was over. I forwarded it to Holloway. In under 5 minutes, he called. "Lorraine, she's just made a serious mistake. That's defamation with fabricated documents. I'll send a formal cease and desist and put her on notice if she continues. We'll sue under Section 16 of the Freedom of Information and Reputation Protection Act." Quietly, I said, "Grant, see? People only lie when they're afraid of the truth." He chuckled. "You're right. But now the law's on your side. Let me handle the rest." I nodded and closed my phone. A sea breeze slipped through the cracked window, salt soft. I sat on the bed, shoulders, finally, loosening after months clenched tight. I thought about tomorrow, the day I'd officially be the winner of $85 million, but that no longer moved me. What soothed me most was proving I'm not crazy, not weak, and don't need anyone to define my worth. I looked at Arthur's photo on the table, his eyes as kind and deep as ever. "See, love," I whispered. "I did it. I kept signing my own name just like you told me." I lay down and let the night wind play with the curtain. For the first time in years I slept deep, no screaming, no slamming doors, no shattering things, only the far-off sound of waves and a peace like old arms around me. Tonight, I stopped running from fear because it turned into evidence of resolve. May brought Savannah's damp winds. Mornings draped the city in a thin, cold veil. On one such morning, I got the court notice. Brielle Carter Whitmore had officially filed suit. The cause, as stated, was seeking custody and determination of the legal guardian for minors Ava and Micah. The complaint was nearly 100 pages. She accused me of manipulating Mason with lottery winnings, psychologically influencing him to break up the family, and lacking the capacity to control a large asset, creating a risk of financial abuse. I read every line, half laughing, half sighing. She still wouldn't stop. Instead of bowing her head and making amends, Brielle chose a loser's favorite lane-swapping victim and culprit. Holloway lifted the file and raised an eyebrow. "She's forgotten she's leaving a trail. This suit won't just fail, it'll expose her completely." I nodded. "I don't need a flashy win, Grant. I just want everything seen in the light." 2 weeks later, the first hearing opened. The judge was Meredith Shaw, a woman in her 50s with a sharp eye and an even voice. When I entered, she looked at me not with pity, but with the quiet respect reserved for someone who has endured too much. Brielle sat across the aisle in a pristine white dress, perfect hair, carefully done makeup. She held Mason's hand, but his eyes were cast down. I knew that grip wasn't love anymore, it was a shackle. Judge Shaw started with assessments of living conditions. The social worker reported, "Miss Whitmore's former rented room is recorded as neat and safe, though modest. The new Seabrook house has been inspected clean, comfortable, suitable for an older adult with space for children. Mr. Mason Whitmore's home is currently well maintained, with a stable plan for both children. By contrast, Miss Brielle Carter Whitmore's residence is under an unpaid mortgage and has a history of noise and disturbance complaints." Brielle tried to cut in, voice shooting high. "I only work from home, and he can't raise the kids alone." Judge Shaw raised a hand. "You'll have your turn." Next came the witnesses. Penelope Banks took the stand with a frayed little notebook. She recounted hearing Brielle insult me, the nights I quietly hauled trash, the bills I paid. When the judge asked why she remembered so clearly, Penelope said, "Because I watched a woman hold a family together with kindness and get pushed out the door by the same people." Then, 2 other neighbors spoke, followed by the corner store manager who confirmed I bought the ticket, signed it, and kept the receipt. Finally, Holloway played video from Penelope's porch camera, Brielle, throwing my things out the window to the shout of, "Go die in a nursing home." The courtroom went silent. Brielle bowed her head. Mason trembled, tears streaming. Judge Shaw tapped the gavel softly, voice steady. "Miss Carter Whitmore, the court has reviewed this. Verbal abuse, control, and defamation of an elder without physical violence still constitutes serious psychological abuse." Brielle burst into tears. I was just stressed. Stress does not excuse humiliation," the judge said, firm. When it was Mason's turn, I didn't look at my son. I just listened. He laid out a plan for single fatherhood, Ava and Micah's school schedules, a detailed budget, proof he'd enrolled in parenting counseling. The judge asked, "Do you have the financial ability to care for both children?" Mason answered, "Yes, Your Honor, I'm back to full-time work. My mother set up an education trust for the kids, but she doesn't interfere in my personal life." That sentence made me relax my shoulders a little. After all these years, he finally knew how to say something honest without dodging it. When it was my turn, the judge asked, "Miss Lorraine, do you have anything to say about custody?" I stood, looked around the room, and said slowly, "I'm not here to win or lose. I just want my 2 grandkids to be safe and grow up in a home without fear. Whichever side can give them that, that's the side I'll support." The courtroom went silent. The judge nodded, her eyes softening. After 2 days of hearings, the ruling was announced. The court granted primary custody to Mason and gave Brielle supervised visitation. She was required to attend a 6-month counseling program on behavioral control and family communication. As for the suit over claiming the lottery prize, the judge dismissed it entirely and formally reprimanded Brielle for deliberate defamation and manipulation of medical information. Judge Shaw read the final lines of the decision, firm and clear. The court recognizes Miss Lorraine Whitmore as the legal owner of the winning ticket and as a victim of defamation. Truth does not need a defender, it only needs time. And time has done its work. Brielle bowed her head, gripping the chair, face white as paper. Mason said nothing. He just held my hand tight, the grip I'd waited 7 years to feel. When we stepped out of the courthouse, wind from Seabrook Bay blew hard, bringing the ocean's salt and a cool mist. My silver hair flew wild, but I didn't smooth it down. For the first time in my life, I let the wind do what it wanted as a sign of freedom. Holloway walked beside me, smiling. "You just won 2 cases at once, Lorraine. People are going to write about this." I smiled. "That's all right." I asked for anonymity. "I don't need anyone to know I won, I just need the kids to know truth won." Penelope came running from a distance and hugged me tight. Told you, justice may arrive late, but it never loses its way. I laughed and looked out at the bay. Thanks, Pen. I just want to go home and plant roses. The trellis is waiting. Mason stood next to me and said softly, Mom, I want to move to Seabrook, not into your house, but nearby. So Ava and Micah can run over to see you anytime. I nodded without saying more. A tear slipped from the corner of my eye, not from sadness but from release. That night, I sat on the porch of my new home, looking out at water gleaming in the moonlight. Waves tapped the shore in steady beats like my own heartbeat. No more anger, no more resentment. I opened my notebook and wrote the final lines for the longest day of my life. Today, the court didn't just rule on Brielle, it ruled on my 7 years of silence. The price of deceit is losing trust. The reward for resolve is peace. The bay wind ran through my hair, salty and light. I looked up and saw a single star break through the gray. Softly, as if to Arthur, I said, See? In the end, justice found its way home. I moved into the little house in Seabrook on a gentle morning in early June. The sea was pale blue, the waves calm, and the kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon under fresh paint. I chose cream walls and set lavender pots by the window so every morning I could sip tea and watch silver waves hit the rocks. The house was small but enough for one person. A bright living room, a warm kitchen, a bedroom facing the bay. I rehung the old photos, Arthur's kind smile, little Mason with a kite, Ava and Micah in my lap when they were tiny. Each picture felt like a stitch pulling the torn pieces of memory back together. On the first day, Mason called. Mom, can I bring the kids over this weekend? I smiled. The door's always open, but bring your dad's chowder recipe. Saturday afternoon, with gold light pouring over the bay, Mason drove up. Ava and Micah leapt from the car, their laughter ringing across the yard. I don't know how long I'd been smiling, only that a simple, complete feeling filled me. Family, without the heaviness. Mason rolled up his sleeves in the kitchen. I watched him clumsily chop onions and taste the soup, and I thought of Arthur, so patient, teaching his son every step. Mom, I don't remember the exact amounts of milk and cream, Mason said, sweat beading on his forehead. I answered, Arthur never measured. He cooked by feel and by love. We made the first chowder in the new kitchen. As the smell of corn, cream, and pepper drifted through the house, I realized some scents never die, they just sleep until your heart is ready to wake them. After dinner, I took Ava outside. She wore a pale blue dress, cheeks pink from the sundae. I opened a small box and brought out the turquoise bicycle, the dream left unfinished years ago. Ava squealed, Grandma, really? This is for me? I nodded, eyes stinging. Yes, for you. But there's a condition, you have to keep a promise. What promise? Never let anyone make you believe you don't deserve good things. She hugged me, then hopped on and pedaled around the yard. Her laughter rang all afternoon like a bell washing the old bitterness clean. Meanwhile, Micah sat in the living room, carefully building with Legos on the wooden table Arthur once sanded by hand. Each time he finished a model, he ran to show me. Look, Grandma, I matched the picture. I patted his head and thought, Arthur, do you see? The kids still have your skillful hands. A few weeks later, Mason started a support group for single dads. I didn't push, just encouraged. Most evenings after, he'd share, They're teaching me how to set boundaries, how to say no without guilt, and how to say yes when it's about responsibility. I smiled. You're learning what your father taught his whole life. Being a good man doesn't require shouting, just knowing right from wrong. Mason changed slowly. The tightness left his face. When he came to pick up the kids, he'd say, Don't let Grandma lift heavy things, clean up after dinner. I didn't step into his personal life anymore. I loved my son, but I'd learned to love with limits. I also set clear financial boundaries. I said plainly, Any help from me, tuition, counseling, childcare needs receipts. A purpose. and a clear commitment. I won't use money to patch over mistakes anymore. Mason understood. He nodded without pride. At last he'd grown up. In the fall, I started a small project, Hands for Home, a program helping older adults who are exploited or abandoned by family find temporary housing. The idea came one night after reading a letter from a woman in another state whose son had taken her pension. I invited Penelope to join. She was so excited she showed up the next morning with a box of paint and brushes. "Where do we begin, Lorraine?" We repainted an old dining table she donated. The new coat covered the scratches, looking worn yet warm. I said, "This table will be the first place where anyone can sit and eat without being insulted." She laughed. "Sounds like our table, just a little bigger." When the paint dried, we centered it in the living room and set a velvet red rose arrangement, Arthur's favorite. That table later became our weekend gathering spot, where I heard my grandkids laugh, Mason talk, kitchen tricks, and Penelope chat about the neighbors. One evening, when the house was quiet, I sat to write. In front of me, a blank page. Beside me, the old fountain pen Arthur used for his first contract. I wrote a letter to myself. "Lorraine, forgiveness doesn't mean erasing. It means moving on without letting the past trip you. People can change, but not everyone deserves to come close again. Your son is learning to be a father. You are learning to be yourself again." I folded the letter and slipped it into a drawer addressed to the woman in the mirror who made it through the storm without breaking. Night fell, and sea air swept across the porch, carrying salt and roses. I went to the garden, cut a red bloom, and brought it inside. On the shelf, Arthur's photo still smiled the same. I set the rose before the frame and whispered, "I put myself first, Arthur, just like you told me, and I kept my word." I sat quietly, listening to the waves. Each one said what I needed to hear. Sometimes healing isn't going back. It's standing together with clear boundaries. I smiled and blew out the candle. The light faded, leaving only cinnamon in the air and the steady hush of the sea, the final lullaby for a woman who found peace, not in others, but in herself. That afternoon, a sudden downpour hammered the porch roof, knocking at memory like a steady drum. I was brewing mint tea when I heard a sound at the gate. Opening the door, I saw Brielle holding a frayed umbrella, eyes bruised with exhaustion, the confidence gone from her hollow face. "What do you need, Brielle?" I asked, calm. She hesitated, then said quietly, almost a whisper, "I need help." I invited her onto the porch but kept the door pulled to. Boundaries aren't just a latch, they're a choice. Rain ran off the roof and streaked the concrete. She sat on the wooden chair Penelope had painted, hands trembling in her lap. "Creditors are after me," she said finally. "I lost my job at the firm. I don't know where to start." I looked at her. The arrogance was gone. Just a woman depleted by her own choices. "You want a quick fix, don't you?" I asked. Brielle nodded, lips quivering. I answered slowly, "There are no shortcuts, Brielle, only responsibility and repair." She lowered her head, tears mixing with rain. "I was wrong. I lost everything. Mason, the kids, even myself." I said nothing, just poured her a hot cup of tea. Mint filled the porch, masking the damp. From a drawer, I took a small envelope. Inside were no bills, only a list of job centers and counseling groups for people with controlling behaviors. I slid it toward her. "These are contacts and addresses. They'll help if you truly want to start over." She held it and looked up. "Can I see the kids?" "The court was clear," I said. "If you complete the counseling sessions, you can have supervised visits. Mason won't block it, and neither will I." She nodded, eyes wet. "And one more thing," I added, gentle but firm. "I won't hand you cash, not $1. But if you need a hot meal or honest advice, this porch stays open as long as you walk in with honesty." Silence stretched, then Brielle choked out, "I'm sorry." Lorraine. I looked at her a long time. I hear you, and I accept it in my own way. She left when the rain eased. Her small figure faded down the speckled road. I knew the loop of resentment had snapped, at least on my end. That night we ate clam chowder together. Mason shared about his support group and said he was helping another single dad find work. I smiled. You're learning to give without losing yourself. Ava ate while telling us how she fell off her bike, scraped her knee, but got up on her own. Grandma, I didn't cry. I remembered what you said. No one stays down if they know how to stand up. I ruffled her hair. Good job, Ava. Micah sat with hands folded, eyes closed. I pray my mom gets better soon. The room fell quiet. I heard wind slip through the window and smelled cinnamon steaming from the pot. After dinner, I stood on the porch, watching Seabrook Bay sink into dark red sunset. Ripples glinted like shards of glass, beautiful, and a reminder that anything once broken can shine again if the light comes from within. I thought of Arthur. If he were here, he'd probably smile and say, "See, Lorraine? In the end, we are our choices." And I had chosen self-respect, clarity, and love with boundaries. That night I wrote the last lines in my notebook. No one can start a new chapter by rereading the old one forever. Today, I close the book not to end it, but to begin again. I set down my pen and looked up at the ceiling. The rain had stopped. Far off, Mason's porch light still glowed warm, not bright, but steady. Ava and Micah were surely asleep, and Brielle somewhere might be learning how to be a decent mother again. I smiled and lit a small candle before Arthur's photo. "Love," I whispered. "I've gone farther than the pain, and I've come back to myself. Thank you for sitting beside me all the way to this moment. If you're still here, you've traveled with me through storms and the quiet places only the heart can hear. What city are you watching from? I'd love to know where this story has reached, and who's listening with me. If anything in this story touched you, self-respect, resilience, or simply love with limits, leave a comment and share your thoughts. And if you'd like to keep sitting with me in this kitchen where there's hot tea, clam chowder, and stories of healing, please subscribe and tap the little bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Your presence wherever you are warms this kitchen more than any flame ever could.